This guy was totally bewildered when he suddenly woke up in the body of a guy who just tried to hang himself. Alan Alphonse, a royal bloodline of the Holy Empire who was exiled for his rebellious attitude. The Holy Empire had banished him to the land of the dead, and after spending some time there causing all sorts of trouble, the real Alan Alphonse finally decided to end it all because he was just so fed up with life. The moment his soul left his body was the exact moment our protagonist was reincarnated into this new shell, and just like that, we've got ourselves a brand new Prince Alan Alphonse. Version 2.0, mild-mannered and content. Though he struggled to adapt to his new identity at first, but after arriving here, he discovered he could see a status window, which provided quite a bit of useful information, so he gradually got used to being Alan Alphonse. His profession is a necromancer. Coincidentally, it's perfect for his current gig as a gravekeeper, since he can command the undead to do the heavy lifting, whether it's digging graves or burying bodies. He doesn't even have to lift a finger himself. His life after reincarnation was peaceful until one day, Alan decided it was time to say goodbye to his zombie crew. They took the news even worse than being dumped by a lover. They were all foaming at the mouth with such dramatic reactions. "Hey, settle down!" Even though it wasn't clear how much those zombies could actually understand, Alan still spoke very politely before he took his leave. "My past life was a bit complicated and hard to talk about, so let's save that story for another time. But this time, I'm going to try and live my second life in peace. Maybe I can actually pull it off now that I have you guys here. You guys are really important to me." After a few sweet words from Alan, the three zombies calmed down quite a bit. Once that was settled, they went right back to their usual routine, digging dirt, burying bodies, and putting up headstones for the departed. At the same time, some distance away from where Alan was standing, two men were struggling to pull a cart carrying two corpses that were already starting to smell and attract flies. "Did you hear that?" one of them asked. "Shut your mouth and keep pushing. Do you want to end up like them? Hurry up and let's get to the prince." The other one lost patience. They didn't bring these two corpses just to ask Alan for a burial. They also had a difficult question to ask. Specifically, how to save their cursed village. "These are the last of the bodies, right?" Alan inspected the two corpses the men had brought. Their village had been almost completely wiped out. The lucky ones who survived had all fled. There was nothing left but corpses, and they had all been transported here. The two men begged Alan to go back to the village with them, thinking that if the prince, who was a necromancer, came along, they would be safer. Alan originally wanted to refuse. As a cast-off prince, he hardly had the strength to protect anyone, but the two of them stuck to him like glue, using every argument in the book to insistently beg him. "Please, what if we get infected too? Please, we're begging you. With you around, we'll definitely be safe." Although he didn't want to agree at all, Alan felt that if he kept refusing, he'd eventually be annoyed to death by these two. So he decided to go back to the village with them. The place was truly horrific. The desolate, ruined scenery looked just like a scene from a horror movie. The drainage system had stopped working long ago, so there were many stagnant, filthy pools in the village. Alan wore a face mask and led the way with his shovel. Following him were the two men, clinging to his side. "Hey, stop crowding me!" Alan lost patience, but "We feel safer sticking to our good luck charm." There was just no helping these two. They actually saw him as a lucky charm. Alan grumbled and scolded them a bit, and right at that moment, a shadow, as if it were barely there, zipped past the three of them at breakneck speed. Only Alan noticed the movement. "What was that just now?" "What do you mean, what? Don't go scaring us." "Probably just some rats running by." The two men were terrified, but Alan wasn't. He grabbed his shovel and walked toward where the shadow had passed, wanting to check what it was. Behind him, the two men were frantically begging Alan not to leave them alone. It seemed these two were all brawn and no brain, with guts as small as a rabbit's. Alan stepped into the small alleyway, his tension at an all-time high. He had a bad feeling. Someone was definitely here, as every nerve in his body was on high alert. It was likely a mundane existence, yet it radiated a brutally vicious aura. Squeak! A sound rang out, making Alan jump. He looked down. Damn it, it's just a rat? But the scene changed in an instant, proving Alan's hunch was right all along. The rat's eyes were bloodshot red, and simultaneously from the nest. Behind it, a whole swarm of other rats lunged out. Every single one had deep red eyes and teeth sharper than a wolf's. They flicked their long, disgusting tongues and aggressively charged at Alan trying to attack. What the hell is this? Alan raised his shovel. Damn, this isn't good. These weren't normal rats. They were zombie rats. It turned out the reason the village ended up like this was because of the rats. They were tiny, but there were just too many of them, and they were moving way too fast. Alan couldn't stop the swarm of rats from crawling all over him. Damn it, give me a break. The shovel in his hand suddenly emitted a blinding blue light. Alan swung it hard, slamming it into the ground and creating a massive shockwave that instantly knocked out all the rats in the immediate vicinity. However, the number of rats he'd knocked out was only a fraction of the horde. Seeing their kin killed, the rest of the pack exploded like a triggered bomb. They all turned their deathly glares toward Alan, letting out terrifying screeches. Whoa, hold on, I didn't mean to, it was an accident. Obviously, trying to explain himself to these things was completely useless. Alan was shoved backward by the swarm of rats, falling into a puddle of murky, filthy water. His shovel dropped right into it. The shovel glowed with a blinding blue light again. As Alan's hand accidentally touched the water, a status window instantly popped up, displaying the words, Skill activated, Deadly Swamp. Deadly Swamp! My foot! Alan was soaked to the bone. The two men finally caught up just then. Your Highness, are you okay? As soon as they arrived, they noticed the filthy alley puddle had turned into holy water. They were stunned, endlessly gushing in awe at Alan's godlike abilities. As expected of the Prince of the Holy Empire. Holy Prince, my foot! Alan cursed furiously in his head. He hadn't expected to accidentally unlock another one of his own skills today. When he first arrived here, Alan already knew this body had the ability to raise the undead, but this latest skill had a purifying effect. It was truly brand new. This new body of his was overflowing with holy power because Alan was originally the grandson of the Holy Emperor. This discovery made Alan feel like he'd been granted godhood in an instant. Wait, what's that? I thought all the villagers were dead. Turns out there's still one kid left. Alan snapped out of his absurd train of thought. Facing the three of them, a girl had appeared out of nowhere. The two men quickly recognized her as Charlotte. She was from next door, but they didn't realize how abnormal she was. Charlotte was hiding a sharp knife in her right hand. Before the two men could even react, she used lightning-fast speed to deliver a clean, sharp slash. Alan reacted just in time, raising the handle of his shovel to block the blade. Otherwise, he would have shared the same fate as those two. What the hell is she, a zombie girl? At first, Alan thought so too. But looking closer, this Charlotte person didn't seem to have completely lost her humanity. The proof being that she was still smart enough to use a knife. Alan swatted the shovel handle to knock her away. Charlotte stumbled, her hand still gripping the knife tight. Her eyes were as bloodshot as the rats, but strangely, she was crying. Charlotte made some weird noises. Alan tried to listen closely to what she was trying to say. Where are my parents? Before he could even react, Charlotte lunged at him frantically again. Alan couldn't think of a better plan. He used the shovel handle to push her down into the holy water puddle behind her, then pinned her down. Charlotte struggled in agony, but gradually. Her strength faded, the savagery on her face vanished, and she returned to a normal state. A few days later, many villagers began flocking to find Alan. We heard you purified a huge swarm of zombie rats that took over a village. We also heard you saved a girl named Charlotte. Please save us too. I didn't save anyone, Alan said coldly, closing the book he was reading. She's dead. How could I possibly save all of you? My bloodline might be related to the Holy Emperor, but I don't have any special powers myself. The villagers heard what Alan said and were crushed. They had traveled a long, arduous way just to get here, hoping he would save them. Alan let out a long, heavy sigh. Just then, the man, Grill, pushed the door open and rushed into the room, breathless. Your Highness, Charlotte is awake. It's all thanks to you. I put her back to sleep because she looked so tired. As he said this, the man realized there were a lot of strangers in the room. The villagers who had just arrived all turned their eyes toward Alan. Naturally, they weren't exactly friendly glares. Why did you say she was dead? Alan felt totally embarrassed. In this situation, he didn't know how to explain it. He could only blame that guy Grill for having such a big mouth. Now it looked like Alan had to take this job. After all, his body was brimming with holy power anyway. I'll help you people, Alan announced, but I have a few conditions. Thanks to the system, after being reincarnated, Alan could see the status information of everyone through a window. Seriously? These people traveled all this way begging for help, yet they don't even trust me just because I'm an exiled trash prince. His conditions were quite simple. Alan declared that he wasn't doing charity work. If they wanted his protection, they had to pay with money or valuable items. And you all have to renovate the church for free. The whole place? The villagers were incredibly flustered. Not only did they have to pay a fee, but they also had to do manual labor? The church Alan was living in was way too dilapidated anyway. However, wanting to save their own skins, everyone agreed to Alan's conditions. He added one more requirement. This deal must not reach the ears of the temple knights, because if the royal family found out, he would definitely be in big trouble. Fine, whatever. The villagers weren't happy about it at all. Many even secretly called Alan a con artist. But he didn't care much. Deep down, Alan was even blooming with joy because finally, this place, considered a place of exile, had actually become useful. Based on the reports they brought in, there are already about 30 corpses turned into zombies in that village. Everyone, grab your gear. What are you waiting for? You told me to handle the zombie horde. Are you expecting me to fight them all by myself? You guys can throw some stuff while I chant some holy spells. Seriously? I'm already paying to hire bodyguards, but I still have to do the dirty work myself? The villagers, reaching their breaking point, openly criticized Alan, calling him a devil. Just then, strange sounds drifted in through the window. Someone glanced outside to check and immediately panicked. It's the zombies! They followed us here! The crowd erupted into chaos, but that actually made them more obedient. Following Alan's instructions, everyone rushed to grab equipment from the storage room, while a legion of zombies slowly approached from the distance. But something didn't feel right. Alan glanced at the dense crowd of zombies. What the hell? You told me it was 30 people. Alan was furious. Village chief, care to explain? My mistake. Must have miscounted when I was running away. If Alan had known this fake village chief was so unreliable, he would have just left them all to their own fate. Still, the zombie army had already tracked them down. I had no other choice, he had to fight. Alan grabbed a shovel and charged to the front, activating his deadly swamp skill once again. That holy water, combined with his purification ability, was incredibly powerful. In truth, using the skills wasn't the hard part. Before Alan transmigrated here, he had volunteered to test a beta version of a VR game to earn some money. The character class he chose in the game was Necromancer. Unfortunately, he was electrocuted and died, only to be reborn in this body. Luckily, after transmigrating, he brought that class with him. Combined with the host's body, which was overflowing with holy power, Alan became even more overpowered. However, he wasn't fully used to wielding that holy energy yet, so things got a little out of control. I can't take it! A man's scream caught Alan's attention. The man knew they were all zombies, but among them was his own wife. Even though he had a weapon in his hand, he couldn't bring himself to strike as the corpse prepared to tear into him. To devour him alive, Alan flew over and kicked it away. Honey! The man cried out, his face streaming with tears. She's dead! Stop overreacting! What the hell do you know, Alan? Losing his patience, Alan pointed his shovel straight at the zombie the man called his wife. Her body is rotting and her soul is lost. If you want your wife to suffer like this, go ahead and run. Otherwise, pick up your weapon and fight. Wow, while Alan was busy enlightening the man, a group of zombies tried to ambush him. He almost got hit. Alan leaned back to dodge, and in his eyes, a figure appeared, with long, silky white hair. She descended from the sky like a goddess, terrifying the nearby zombies. Looking closely, it was Charlotte. Your Highness, are you all right? Charlotte was originally just an innocent child. When the plague hit the village, her mother comforted her, saying it was just a short time before things would get healthy again for the new year. Until one day, Charlotte was chased by red-eyed rats. She ran home, only to be horrified by the sight of her mother being bitten by her father. Charlotte, run, my child! Those were the last words her mother said before she, too, turned into a zombie. Then came a nightmare. The rats surrounding the house outside, while Charlotte's parents chased her inside. She was forced to grab whatever she could to defend herself. But the events that followed were a blur in Charlotte's memory. All she knew was that the rats that had tried to bite her began to ignore her. Does that mean I've become one of them? She didn't know, and Charlotte didn't care anymore. Now everyone in this village had been mutated. There was no one left to save her. Charlotte sat in the corner of the room, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she wished for someone to come and save her, even if it were just one person. Fortunately, that person finally came, and it was none other than Alan. Charlotte's eyes snapped open in shock. She was lying on a soft bed. Her eyes were still bloodshot, but her consciousness had returned. "Oh, you're awake? Where am I?" Charlotte sat up, her head pounding like a hammer. "His Highness told me to take good care of you. The zombies are still out there, so make sure to keep quiet." Outside the window came the sound of Alan shouting, along with the screams and growls of the zombies. Charlotte saw and recognized that familiar figure. She burst the window open. Before the man could stop her, Charlotte leaped out, landing right where the zombies were trying to ambush Alan. The impact of her landing was so powerful that the ground cracked into a massive crater, and the surrounding zombies were scared out of their wits by the shockwave. "Are you all right, Your Highness?" A short time passed. Alan stood frozen like a statue, staring at the mountain of zombies Charlotte had wiped out. No way. How could she do all of this by herself? On the sidelines, the villagers were cheering for Charlotte like she was a goddess. If Alan said he wasn't annoyed, he'd be lying. He was clearly the one holding the line against the zombies. However, it seemed that Charlotte's strength was linked to him. It looked like Alan had managed to purify her just before she turned into a full zombie, and therefore, right now, you have the mind of a normal person, but the strength of a zombie. Stop patting yourselves on the back. We have to take care of your families now. Alan told the crowd, "I know everyone is exhausted, but it's best if we just put an end to this." The group turned silent, but the departed still needed to be set free. Alan stepped up to perform the purification ritual himself. To put it simply, it meant holding a collective funeral and praying for the departed to rest in peace so their souls wouldn't be lost anymore. This was also part of the reason why Alan was exiled to this place. The land of the dead is often disturbed by the rise of zombies, and only those with abundant holy power can perform the purification ritual to suppress that effectively. But one thing that deeply puzzled Alan was the speed at which the villages were being destroyed. It was unprecedented. He asked the village chief again, but the chief insisted that there had been nothing strange or unusual in the village, and from the moment the first person fell ill until the entire village perished, it only took exactly 1 month. So it seems this epidemic is a deliberate act. Alan muttered this to himself. It left the remaining villagers in a state of panic, but Alan didn't have the time to worry about their mood. If his hypothesis was correct, then the one manipulating the zombies must be nearby. However, he didn't know how to find them. Forget it. I'm going to sleep. You all handle the rest. Alan dragged his exhausted body back to his room. Performing the funeral had drained him, and he needed a good night's sleep to recover. But he hadn't even dozed off for long. A horrific scream woke Alan up. "What's happening so early in the morning?" "Kidnapping! Kidnapping! The zombies have kidnapped someone!" Alan woke up instantly. 2 young men were babbling about witnessing zombies kidnapping a young woman into the forest. According to them, the kidnapped person was a girl named Morian. She always helps the villagers around here, and she even helps heal everyone's wounds afterward. "Do I know her?" Alan interrupted them. Even though he had been reincarnated into this body, the memories of the original host were still something he couldn't quite grasp. The 2 guys hesitated for a long time before daring to speak. She's a beauty, and she turned down the prince's confession because of that humiliation. You even once... Stop right there, I remember now. This was truly embarrassing. Alan gritted his teeth, wondering how many more stupid things the original owner of this body had done. After transmigrating here, the one suffering the pain of this humiliating heartbreak was none other than him. The 2 young men suggested that Alan form a search party to bring Morian back. It sounded chivalrous, but Alan knew damn well these jerks were only fired up, because Morian was beautiful. However, zombies kidnapping people like this had never happened before. It seems he would have to check it out himself to see if there were any suspicious signs. Alan put on his coat, ready to go find her. "Sir, Han, a hunter from our village might be useful to you." "All right. Then let's head out." The 2 young men's eyes lit up like car headlights when they saw Alan agree to go find the beauty. As the 3 of them were about to set off, Alan saw Charlotte standing not far away, looking blank. She was observing him without taking her eyes off him. "What's wrong? Is she still bitter at me because I accidentally took her down earlier?" Alan felt a bit uneasy looking at Charlotte's unfriendly gaze. Especially after watching her take down a whole mountain of zombies alone, he felt even more uneasy. So, Alan took off running to avoid her gaze. Following closely behind were the two womanizing guys. "Hurry up! If we're too late, Morian will become the zombies' lunch." The hunter, Han, with his extensive forest experience, quickly tracked the footprints of the zombies. He was certain they had entered a cave. The four stood at the cave entrance. Alan could feel the scent of eerie energy, pouring out from within, thick and heavy. If this place was crawling with zombies or was the source of the plague, it wasn't impossible. However, kidnapping humans wasn't something the brainless idiots like zombies could do. So, Alan thought of another possibility. This cave might be the mastermind's lair. "Should we just burn this place to the ground right now?" Alan suggested. The two womanizing guys were shocked when they heard this. "Sir, Morian is still in there." "Oh, right. She's an innocent civilian after all." Alan shelved his arsonist thoughts. But this place was still very suspicious. Moreover, he could feel that this cave was an ideal base for the zombies to unleash their full power. If they all went in to save one single woman, he feared they would just become a feast for the monsters. "So how are we supposed to save Morian now?" "Let's prepare thoroughly and come back later." Of course, if they did that, the chances of Morian being alive would drop significantly. Alan hadn't even finished his sentence when a roar came from behind them. As he turned around, a zombie bear hit his vision at a very close range. "Prince!" the others screamed in horror, but it was too late. The bear's sharp teeth sank deep into Alan's shoulder. It aggressively dragged him into the cave and then tossed Alan off a cliff. The pain radiated from his shoulder straight to his brain. At the same time, he used the skills Deadly Swamp and Evil Curse. Just as expected, Evil Curse was a healing skill. Even though his body was full of holy power, luckily for Alan, I've already researched and prepared a few skills for dire situations like this one. The status window displays the basic info for this bear. It's called the Gluttonous King, and its stats are being boosted by necromancy. So that's how it is. Thanks to that, the Gluttonous King can maintain such terrifying power even after being hit by the holy water from Alan's dead swamp. We're in trouble now, Alan. I haven't come up with a way to beat a bear yet, especially one being controlled by a necromancer. The Gluttonous King lets out a roar and charges at Alan, who, acting like a total amateur, just stands there holding his shovel, having no clue how to handle the situation. Alan only knows how to run, but how can he possibly outrun the Gluttonous King? Just as its claws are about to swipe him, Charlotte appears once again. She leaps down from the sky just like before, plunging the dagger in her hand precisely into the Gluttonous King's left eye. Alan stares at the scene in shock. He has no idea when Charlotte started following him, let alone how she managed to arrive just in time to save him. But that's not important right now. "Charlotte, keep that damn thing pinned down." Charlotte gets swatted away by the bear, but with her current body, she's barely phased. She grips her knife tight, hacking away at it every chance she gets. Thud. The Gluttonous King is sent flying. "Thanks for buying me time to use my skill." A hand reaches out toward Charlotte. She's about to grab it, but something feels off. The hand is jet black and shriveled. That's clearly a zombie's hand. "Damn it, don't tell me the prince has mutated too?" But all of Charlotte's doubts are quickly answered. From deep beneath the ground, countless zombies suddenly erupt. Alan flashes a confident smile, his teeth as blindingly white as a toothpaste commercial. "Now this is how I should join a battle. With this many, that bear doesn't stand a chance." The Gluttonous King is huge, but it's struggling as it gets swarmed and bitten by the undead, and every time it knocks one away, even more rise up from the earth. Alan's face, on the other hand, has turned deathly pale. That's because he poured all his strength into summoning so many zombies, and his condition isn't looking too stable. That bear is much stronger than Alan's zombies. It's already killed countless numbers of them. But Alan can feel it. At this pace, the outcome is already sealed. The Gluttonous King is covered in countless scratches and bites. It's completely exhausted. Finally, Charlotte lands the finishing blow. Alan can barely stand, and Charlotte rushes to catch him. "I'm fine. I just used a bit too much holy power." In the back of his mind, Alan is still wondering, what is Charlotte doing here? Is she here to settle the score because he dunked her in holy water last time? Charlotte, I accidentally let you see my full power. But I want to live a peaceful life, so could you keep it a secret?" Alan is exhausted. his face looking drained, but through Charlotte's eyes he looks like he's got a filter on, making him look so sparkling and beautiful that she can't look away. "You are my savior. Of course I will obey your every wish." Alan is dumbfounded at the words savior. He always assumed Charlotte saw him as a thorn in her side because of the holy water incident. Who knew she had such a simple, idolizing mindset? Before the two can say another word, shouts echo down from the cliff. "Your Highness!" They've brought more people along with torches and ropes. "Charlotte, why did you jump down there?" "Your Highness, are you all right?" The men who just arrived quickly throw down ropes and climb down. When they see the carcass of the gluttonous king, they are incredibly shocked, as this monster possessed immense power and had killed countless people. The prince and Charlotte killed this thing? That's amazing. Charlotte is wondering whether she should deny it or not, but Alan speaks up first. "I think there's a necromancer in this cave. He tried to turn this place into his base and killed the bear that was already here. By the time we arrived, it was already dead. Villagers are truly easy to fool. Just a few words from Alan and they believe it hook, line, and sinker. Alan orders everyone to go deeper into the cave with him. That woman, Marion, is likely dead. She was just a trap set by the necromancer to lure Alan in. But even so, he really wants to know how strong that guy is. The group ventures deep into the cave. There are no more monsters or strangers, but near the end, the young men discover Marion tied up, sitting with her head hung low. Alan looks at her, his face going completely blank. Why is Marion still alive? This seems a bit beyond what he expected. "Marion!" The girl's obsessed youngsters rush forward, wanting to untie the beauty, but just at that moment, Alan seems to sense something is wrong. The shovel in his hand swings, without a shred of mercy for her beauty, slamming hard into Marion's face. The whole group is stunned by his action. A look of hostility and cruelty is clearly visible on Alan's face. "I should have found something sharper to cut you with." "Your Highness, what's wrong?" Of course, only Alan knows why he acted that way, because his status window has just exposed this woman's true identity. There's no young, beautiful girl here. Marion is actually 63 years old. Her specialties are seduction, necromancy, curses, assassination, and she especially loves human dissection. Perhaps Marion didn't think her cover was blown. She still keeps up a pitiful, trembling, and deeply innocent facade. "Your Highness, surely there has been some misunderstanding." "Shut your trap! I'm not listening to a word you say. Stop trying to deceive everyone." Alan spoke up to explain. "She is the necromancer hiding in the cave." "Hey, everything from your name to your age is a lie." Marion's heart skipped a beat and panic set in, but she still adamantly denied everything Alan just said. He just gave a cold laugh, then pulled out a vial of holy water and demanded Marion drink it. If she's truly an ordinary person, it's just a good tonic, but if she's a necromancer, her insides will melt the moment she drinks this. "You don't need to give a commoner like me something so precious." Marion was already terrified out of her wits, but tried to act calm. Alan, however, had no intention of letting her off the hook. "It really is a good tonic, so drink up." Marion's mind was in total chaos. She thought her disguise as Marion had been perfect for the past year, and the villagers hadn't suspected a thing, yet this prince somehow knew the truth. Moreover, his abilities were no joke, the proof being that the gluttonous king, whom she had manipulated into attacking, was taken down in the blink of an eye. "What? You're not going to drink it?" "His Highness is bestowing this upon you. Why aren't you reaching out with both hands to accept it, huh?" Knowing she couldn't hide it anymore, Marion dropped the act. Her face twisted and wrinkled, revealing a vicious look as her hair turned white. "I was originally going to let you live a little longer, but acting like this will only make you die sooner." "Your Highness," at Marion's summoning, many skeletons clawed their way out of the ground, but to Alan, these were just small fry. He calmly gave each one a whack with his shovel. "Who gave you the right to use that arrogant tone in front of me? While I'm still trying to be civil, get back into the ground, you filthy things!" The skeletons, traumatized by the beating, scrambled back into the earth, but Marion wasn't lucky enough to escape. She was pinned to the ground by Charlotte from behind and, once again, was tightly bound, unable to resist. Alan forced her to confess all her crimes in front of everyone. "My real name is Morgana. I'm 63 years old, and I am a necromancer." The young men in the village who had been crushing on her were all shattered. No one expected the goddess they all adored was actually an old hag, and an evil necromancer at that. Morgana had been exposed, but she didn't want to die yet. She promised to reveal the mastermind if Alan would spare her life. Oh? So you're saying there's someone pulling the strings behind you? Alan was intrigued. That's right. The order I received was to seduce you and make your death look like a suicide. Alan couldn't help but be surprised. So the original owner of this body didn't kill himself, but was murdered? Truly shocking. The Black Church ordered me to kill the 7th prince of the Empire. Morgana had discovered that Alan was also a necromancer during the battle with the gluttonous king. If the Black Church found that out, it would be a disaster. So he signaled Charlotte. I guess I'll have to kill her then. Charlotte's blade, obeying the order, pressed against Morgana's throat. She became more panicked than ever, desperately begging Alan for her life while promising to tell him everything she knew about the Black Church. Alan temporarily spared her life. The villagers will decide your fate. After all, there are many people here who lost loved ones because of you. Morgana lay curled up like a chicken waiting to be slaughtered. Everyone looked at her with burning resentment. How do you intend to deal with her? Alan asked a young man who, until moments ago, had been head over heels for Marion. Her punishment will match the crimes she committed. Her death will be slow and agonizing. Afterward, we'll throw her into the forest for the wild beasts to tear apart, and whatever is left will be turned into zombies. That's the only fitting end for a necromancer who desecrates the dead, wouldn't you agree? Alan shuddered to himself. Medieval punishments really are barbaric. However, he didn't really care. What Alan was thinking about now was the Black Church that Morgana mentioned earlier. Although he couldn't get more information out of her, Alan had successfully stolen a few books from her belongings. The next day, while lounging in the church, Alan finally had time to flip through the pile of books, though he couldn't read much of it, because his head was filled with too many questions. Could this assassination attempt have been orchestrated by my own siblings? Alan whispered to himself. The hypothesis wasn't entirely impossible. After all, the struggle for the throne within the royal family is always inevitable. Unexpectedly, Charlotte, who was hiding not far away, heard everything. She had always had many questions about this prince. Everyone said Alan had changed. Charlotte felt it too. Even though he wasn't much taller than her, Alan always stepped up to face the danger head-on. When the battle started, he saved countless people and held memorial services for so many who had fallen. Through others, Charlotte also learned that it was Alan who took care of her parents' bodies while she was still unconscious. With Charlotte, Alan was the benefactor of her entire family. She wanted to thank him, but mere words weren't enough. Today, she realized that so many dangers constantly surrounded Alan. He needs a shield to protect himself, Charlotte thought. She picked up a book on royal swordsmanship, if that's the case, to protect this great prince. I need to become stronger. Alan seriously studied Morgana's books. From them, he learned that zombies are categorized into many types and evolve over time. If the body rots away, they become skeletons, but if they manage to keep their body intact, they can evolve into ghouls with power far superior to any ordinary undead. As time goes by, ghouls gradually evolve into headless knights, then vampires. The more they evolve, the smarter and stronger they become, and darkness also helps them absorb more power from corpses. They live fast, so their common goal is to head toward the land of the undead because the temperature there is always much lower than elsewhere. When winter comes, it is the coldest time of the year. The instinct of the undead to seek out the land of the undead grows even more intense. This phase is called the death wave, peaking on October 25th, the coldest day of the year. The number of undead flocking to the land of the undead also reaches its peak. Alan closes the book and sighs heavily. There's still a whole month until the death wave ends. Your Highness, the books are finished. Let me put them back in their place here. Alan watches Charlotte with a deeply suspicious gaze. For the past few days, she has been lingering around the church even though he never asked her to. Besides organizing books, Charlotte also cleans, tidies up the graveyard, and prepares food. Of course, she hasn't asked for a single cent in return. Whatever. Alan thinks to himself. The man named Grill took Charlotte as his adopted daughter. After all, only a few people were left in that village, and she finally has a home to return to. Surely, once she gets bored of doing community service at the church, she'll leave on her own. While lost in thought, the cathedral doors burst open. 3 tall men in iron armor walk in with intense energy. Through his status window, Alan immediately identifies who they are. The leader is Hamondian, vice commander of the 10th Holy Knights Order. Rumor has it he caught the witch Morgana. Alan uses a look of contempt to judge this man from head to toe. I doesn't even bother to offer a greeting and charges straight into the main topic. Even though Alan is in exile, he is still a prince. This attitude is just too arrogant. Yeah, I caught her along with those villagers. Why, do you guys have a problem with that? We're just here to confirm. But it seems everything is true, huh? You bravely fought alongside the villagers and killed the Gluttony King with farming tools, eh? While a commoner named Grill killed 30 undead and cornered the witch with holy water. Hearing Dian recount this, a bunch of question marks appear over Alan's head. It seems this story is a bit off, isn't it? That's what the farmer named Grill told me. Charlotte puts her hand to her forehead. She's truly speechless. She knows everyone wants to claim credit, but making up stories like this is a bit too much. Alan feels even more contempt for Hamondian. He is a vice commander of the Holy Knights, yet he is so gullible. But putting that aside, what Dian cares about most is the matter of Morgana belonging to the Black Church. That is an extremely brutal organization. Morgana alone has already devastated 5 villages. Therefore, he needs to be sure whether she has been completely eradicated or not. She was beaten to death and her body was thrown away, Alan confirms firmly. Was it you who dealt the blow, Your Highness? How could it be me? I don't have that kind of strength. Although Alan was indeed the one who helped suppress Morgana, he is in a phase where he cannot reveal his true power to outsiders yet. So it's best to just play along with Grill's tall tales, yielding the credit to him and the villagers. I was just there, and I was so scared I almost peed my pants. Alan doesn't forget to add his own spice to the story while pretending to be pathetic and describing the situation back then. This masterclass in acting truly makes Dian feel sick. He suspects nothing and still believes the person in front of him is the useless, exiled prince from before. Then you must know about the witch's magic books, right? That was also one of Dian's missions, to recover forbidden books written about dark magic. Alan naturally knows the whereabouts of those books, because he snatched them himself, but he'd be an idiot to hand them over now, so Alan continues using his top-tier acting skills to play dumb. Maybe the villagers burned them. You should ask them. Dian continues, completely unsuspicious. Finally, he hands Alan a cloth bag containing 80 gold coins and asks him to distribute them equally among the villagers, because this is the reward for hunting down Morgana. Alan agrees on the surface, but he's not an idiot. Why would he share the money with anyone else? Between the forbidden books and this gold, he's hit the jackpot. My duty here is finished. I ask to take my leave, Your Highness. Alan doesn't pay much attention to Dian because he is still busy basking in the joy of hitting the jackpot with those 80 gold coins. Please pack your belongings. Until Dian says this, both Alan and Charlotte feel like they've been struck by lightning. The time for the death wave to erupt most violently is near. Dian's group is ordered to escort Alan to the Lonia territory. This place is still within the range of the land of the undead, half a day's journey from their current position. However, Lonia is different. That territory is built with many fortresses that can block the undead's attacks, to fight the undead during the death wave. We have gathered soldiers and prisoners. Alan hears this and realizes something is wrong. Hey, don't tell me. Dian sighs heavily. There will be many casualties, so please come and preside over the funerals in the Lonia territory. Damn it, Alan even thought the royal family was taking pity on him to let him escape to safety. Turns out it was just a job transfer. He, along with Charlotte and Grill, takes a carriage to Lonia. This place is ruled by Lord Janat Lepang. Even without a status window, one could feel this nobleman is very gentle and benevolent. The Duke is already being incredibly mild and merciful. The Viscount greeted the Alan group very cordially and was quite polite. But Alan was not happy at all. Why? Because the place he was standing in was known as the High Fortress. It's a breeding ground for death, where every year countless victims, including prisoners and soldiers, are gathered to appease the wrath of the undead. They have to fight those monsters non-stop for a whole month just to see the spring. That's why the death toll in Ionia is uncountable every year. You just need to help us treat the wounded and preside over the funerals. Dian briefed him on his duties again while leading Alan to his quarters. Oh, in that case, I think I can handle it. But there are at least 2,000 to 3,000 casualties every year. This statement turned Alan to stone. Even with 80 priests and many soldiers assisting, 2,000 to 3,000 is just too many. Alan was terrified he'd drop dead from pure exhaustion. Viscount, bring me some wine, I need alcohol! Viscount Ganat, though bewildered, brought Alan several bottles of rare wine. Alan's attitude grew even more dramatic. I'd rather die from a hangover than from exhaustion. Scarlet, real, you two must protect me before the death wave reaches its peak. Having said that, Alan rushed into his room and slammed the door shut. Dian sighed. Sure enough, this prince hadn't matured even a little bit. But inside the room, Alan was hugging the precious wine bottles and chuckling, playing the fool. It was an exhausting job after all. He touched the glass bottle and the wine inside instantly turned into holy water, with the workload. Dian mentioned earlier, if he wanted to get through this peacefully, he needed plenty of holy water in reserve. While peering around the room, Alan discovered a gun displayed on the wall. In this world, guns are an invention that isn't valued. People still prefer melee weapons to deal with monsters. This is because here, they don't use gunpowder. They use mana or holy water as ammunition. Furthermore, because it consumes a massive amount of mana, even a trained mage can only fire it 5 times. Each shot requires a 5-minute interval. At that rate, it's useless on the battlefield. So it's no surprise that the gun quickly became an antique. Alan condensed mana from his 2 fingers to form a bullet. He aimed the gun and pulled the trigger. A bullet forged from divine power tore through the air, its force so strong it blew a huge hole right through the wall. Divine energy activated. System notification sent. Done. What was that sound? Your Highness! From outside came urgent calls. The incident just now had made Dian extremely annoyed. The sound in the room was too loud to cover up. But Alan adamantly refused to let anyone in, acting incredibly shy. Don't peek into a teenage boy's room. You guys are violating my privacy. Dian felt utterly disgusted. As a prince of the Holy Empire, how could he put on an act like a teenage girl? I was certain that Alan was up to some kind of mischief again. A scumbag will always be a scumbag. Dian gritted his teeth. Although when he first arrived at the church, Dian had investigated the villagers. They all unanimously agreed that after the suicide attempt, Alan's personality had changed significantly. He not only completed his duties at the cemetery, but also took the lead in the fight against the undead. He saved us. The village elder himself said so, but Dian still didn't trust it. He thought Alan must have threatened the villagers in some way to keep them from telling the truth. After all, Dian had never had any affection for this arrogant prince. Conversely, he trusted that braggart named Grill implicitly. The claim that he single-handedly defeated Morgana sounded ridiculous, but Dian didn't doubt it at all. He even planned to write a recommendation letter for Grill to participate in the Holy Knight selection exam. Suddenly, Dian heard a commotion nearby. He assumed the prisoners were fighting again, but when he arrived, he found Alan pinning a man to the ground with a vicious expression. Hey, do you have any idea who I am? The cause of this brawl had started a few minutes earlier. Alan, as a prince serving punishment, also had to dig graves like any other prisoner. Everything would have been fine if not for the appearance of Headson, the eldest son of a count. This arrogant brat obviously didn't know Alan was a prince. In the eyes of him and his lackeys, he just looked like a hick from the suburbs. Head came all the way there looking for a servant, and unfortunately, he set his sights on Scarlet. Is she your maid? Head asked Alan. It seemed he had been captivated by Scarlet's beauty and wanted to take her as a plaything. Ugh, what a disgusting dog. Alan couldn't stomach this mocking attitude, so he turned to leave first. He'd rather dig holes than associate with trash like this. Hey, servant! Seeing Alan leave, Head waved for Scarlet to come over. She obediently held a basket of sweet potatoes and walked closer, but Head's crude hands didn't know when to stop. He grabbed Scarlet's wrist. Come here, play with us. Take the place of your busy master. Scarlet was extremely uncomfortable being teased, but since Head was a nobleman's son, she tried to refuse politely. However, he had no intention of letting go. Scarlet lost her patience and used her strength to sharply twist Head's hand, making him scream in pain. Alan, standing to the side, couldn't help but marvel. Whoa, Scarlet only needed a little bit of force to break Head's hand already. In excruciating pain, Head started losing control of his tongue. He kept spewing vile insults at Sarlacc, even though Alan told him, "That's enough." But Head still had no intention of stopping. I can tell you inherited that pathetic stupidity from your parents, didn't you? Suits you perfectly. Half the people in the Deadlands have already turned into zombies. Your family will be next soon enough. Hearing this, Alan just couldn't take it anymore. He raised the shovel in his hands and smashed it hard into the ground right next to Head's foot, scaring the life out of him. Not stopping at just a scare, Alan unleashed a lightning-fast punch straight into Head's face. The strike wasn't even his full power, but it was enough to knock Head out cold in a pathetic heap. How could you do this when you know who I am? Head tried to use his status as a count's son to intimidate Alan, but he ran into a madman instead. Alan stomped hard on his chest. And what about you? Do you even know who I am? Just then, Deanne appeared, cutting off the scuffle between the two boys. Seeing him, Head looked like a drowning man clutching a straw. Head cried about his father's status in this region, and demanded that Deanne punish Alan for daring to strike a nobleman's son. With Head screaming on one side and Deanne nagging on the other, IT gave Alan a massive headache. He placed a hand over his lips and muttered something. Instantly, everyone present was silenced, including Diane. Even if they tried to open their mouths, no sound would come out. Is this holy magic? Deanne was shocked. Haman, tell him who I am. Alan didn't even move his lips, but Deanne could hear that voice echoing clearly in the space around them. It was a complete command. He felt as if he were being forced against his will. With no power to resist, Diane finally managed to open his mouth, forcing out the words, Alan Alphonse, the seventh grandson of the Holy Empire's emperor. By now, Head was scared out of his wits. He lay on the ground, trembling as if he'd seen a ghost, before finally fainting from pure terror. As for Alan, he was tossed into a cell. Despite his status as a prince, he was still officially in exile and striking a nobleman was forbidden. As a result, Alan was locked up for a week. Meanwhile, Deanne was deep in thought about what had just happened. He had always thought of Alan as a useless, incompetent kid, but it seemed the royal bloodline was nothing to mess with. At least the boy knows how to use holy incantations. A shout from a subordinate snapped Deanne back to reality. The wave of death was reaching its peak. The weather was freezing, and the snow was falling too thick. They had to force the prisoners out to the fortress gates to clear the snow, to ensure the fortress stayed at an optimal height for defense. But the snow was falling faster than they could clear it, and progress was slowing down. Get all the prisoners back inside, Deanne ordered. Unfortunately, the worst happened shortly after. Two severely wounded prisoners came sprinting back toward the castle. The gates were immediately slammed shut. Zombies attacked us from behind. The blizzard hid them. We didn't even notice them lurking there. Everyone behind us, they were all eaten alive. The atmosphere turned incredibly tense. Diane ordered everyone to their positions and climbed to the highest point of the wall. He stared out into the distance. The strange thing was that everything was eerily quiet. There were no signs of a zombie attack. Looking at the two prisoners being treated by the priest, Deanne was even more confused. According to their story, the zombies had launched a sneak attack from behind. This didn't make any sense at all. Normally, zombies were strong and fearless, but they were also mindless brutes. They acted entirely on instinct and had zero tactical awareness. That's why, despite their numbers, they were able to suppress and destroy them year after year. What on earth is going on? Deanne wondered deeply. But the answer came to him quickly. Far away in the blizzard, a zombie army was approaching. The strange thing was, they were marching in perfect unison, moving to the beat of the drum played by a leader. What the hell is this? Diane had never seen anything like this before, but the next thing shocked him even more. From the zombie army, a loud, clear voice echoed, "You living beings, be afraid, be jealous, and crave the release of death. It is only natural that you are afraid. I am the one who rules this world. The Savior will save this world through death. I am the heir of the Grim Reaper." As the distance closed, they finally caught sight of the owner of that voice. It was a fat brute with 4 sharp fangs, sitting regally on a palanquin carried by many other zombies. This was clearly no ordinary undead. It was a vampire count who could use necromancy. At the same time, Alan was growing impatient. His dinner hadn't been delivered yet. Even if he was grounded, they couldn't just starve a prince. "Your Highness!" A hurried call rang out. It was Lord Jennett, carrying keys to let Alan out. "Wait, I'm still grounded, aren't I, Jennett?" I explained the situation to Alan briefly, letting him know that a zombie army led by a vampire was outside. "Are you seeing things? How could a high-level monster like that show up here?" Jennett didn't know either, but he was certain the leader was a vampire. Deanne was dealing with them, while he was tasked with evacuating the prince, before this place collapsed. But the situation spiraled quickly. The prison suddenly shook violently, and then a pile of zombies came crashing down from the ceiling. They smashed through the cell windows to charge in. Alan and Janat stared at the wriggling pile of zombies on the floor, their faces turning pale. Are you kidding me? That thing actually bundled the zombies together and threw them at us? Alan quickly used his shovel to block them, barricading the cell. In this situation, he was certain the outside world was already crawling with zombies. We need to evacuate everyone right now, or sooner or later, the whole city will turn into zombies. Renard followed Alan's orders and left first to mobilize the troops for the evacuation. Alan was left alone to face the horde. His mind went completely blank. Usually, Alan was always in control of the situation, but this time his opponent was completely unexpected. Attacking in such overwhelming numbers like this. Of the 36 strategies, fleeing is the best. Alan temporarily used holy water to contain the zombies in the prison and made his escape. But outside the prison, the scene was even more horrifying. It was a true battlefield. The sounds of scratching, tearing, and screaming created a chaotic scene. Soldiers were trying to use their shields to form a line, a barrier to protect the civilians, but the zombies were attacking from all sides, leading the defense to a stalemate. Seeing that, Alan couldn't just stand by. The batch of holy water he brewed probably wouldn't last long, but if he didn't do something now, everything would be over. With that thought, Alan slammed his shovel into the ground. He prepared to use a wide-range skill. Holy water gushed out like a spring, surged into the sky, and fell back down, creating a rainstorm. This holy rain was truly effective. The zombies hit by it immediately weakened. Many even clutched their heads, screaming in agony. Conversely, for the living who touched the holy water, their wounds healed rapidly. They soon realized this was no ordinary rain. This is holy water falling from the sky? It's a blessing from the goddess Gala. But among the commoners, some had already discovered the source of the holy rain. It's His Highness. Look, the holy water is surrounding His Highness. At this moment, Alan truly looked like a prince acting for the people and the nation. The villagers couldn't help but marvel at his talent. A prince is always a prince. Even while in exile, Alan remained the grandson of the legendary Saint Emperor who once defeated the King of the Deadlands. 5 decades ago, before the battle in the city was brought under control by Alan, the people had already found a place to evacuate. Lord Jennett had opened the cellar in his mansion, so all the residents were temporarily safe. Alan retracted his skill. His face was ghastly pale. Creating that rain had exhausted him completely. But the battle was far from over. All soldiers who are still strong, Alan called out in a loud voice. Come with me to help the knights outside. The soldiers looked at each other, bewildered. They didn't have weapons suitable for fighting the undead. So Alan decided to bless all their spears. The soldiers' ordinary shields were also imbued with a divine aura. To put it simply, that pile of scrap metal was now effective for confronting the zombies. Let's go! We must fight to survive! The city gate opened. Outside, the scene was 100 times more tragic than before. The knights were locked in an intense struggle. Seeing more people emerge from the gate, the undead immediately charged. The soldiers just closed their eyes and swung once, and the spears in their hands sliced a zombie's head in two. Continuation. Whoa! I barely even had to touch the zombies with my weapon. The prince's divine aura is amazing. After what just happened, they felt much more confident. The zombies were nothing now. All the soldiers charged forward with fervor. The more they fought, the more fired up they became. At this pace, they could definitely win. And having Alan, the descendant of the great hero by their side, only boosted their morale further. Amidst the smoke and fire, there was suddenly the sound of horse hooves. A headless knight appeared. This thing wasn't as strong as a vampire, but its ability was definitely far beyond a normal undead. It quickly overwhelmed an entire area. Its sharp spear, carrying the chill of death, aimed straight for a soldier. Just as he was trembling, Alan arrived in time to save him. The barrel of his gun raised, and a mana bullet began to form. Sorry about this. This is my second time using this thing, so I'm not very comfortable with it yet. Bang! A shot left the gun barrel, heading straight for the headless knight. Meanwhile, the vampire was savoring the chaotic battle. The scent of the living made him incredibly excited. 50 years ago, he was just a lowly zombie, then evolved into a ghoul, then a headless knight, and finally a vampire like he was now. There were many other vampires, and they were ranked based on the amount of mana they possessed. This guy had only recently evolved, so he wasn't respected by other vampires. In return, he possessed the bloodline of a count and something no other undead had. That was the skull of the undead King Ammon, who had been defeated by Alan's grandfather 50 years ago. Thanks to this, the vampire count could gather a massive amount of mana. In just a few decades, what would normally take at least 100 years. The army of undead he was leading numbered up to 20,000. With this scale, the fat guy harbored ambitions to surpass the rank of a normal count. He wanted to walk the path of a king. Naturally, the stronger he grew, the less he feared divine power. The Saint Knight Order, in his eyes now, was just a bunch of weak children. Surrender quickly and become my undead. Ha ha ha! On the fortress, Dian was frantically ordering soldiers to use catapults. They had to fight with all their might because when the sun went down, the zombies would become stronger. Dean's nerves were stretched to the breaking point because he knew a certain number of zombies had infiltrated the territory. But Dean couldn't leave the wall because without a commander here, everything would become chaotic. Damn it, is the village inside still okay? If it wasn't, what would happen? Dean seemed to be drowning in extreme stress. In times like these, he only wished His Majesty the Saint Emperor were here. The village is still fine. The person who just arrived was Charlotte, carrying several swords and a pile of spears. Because His Highness is here. I will protect the village where His Highness is staying with all my might. All right, Dean stammered. The reason for his attitude was Charlotte's overwhelming aura. Dean initially thought she was just a maid, but look at that mountain of weapons she's carrying. Even a fully trained soldier couldn't handle that much. She's much stronger than Dean imagined. Charlotte appearing felt like a huge boost to his morale. Even a child like her is risking her life to fight. So how could he be the weak one? Dean was already bracing himself for the worst-case scenario. Maybe he would have to face the vampire count head-on and take his head himself. The vampire count used his old trick again, bundling the zombies into a giant mass and hurling them straight at the city wall. Dean was terrified. He quickly ordered Charlotte to hide behind him. "Oh, God of War, please grant me the strength to protect these poor lost souls," Dean prayed. He drew his sword, which shimmered with divine power, but Charlotte seemed to think he was reacting too slowly. She seized the moment and charged forward to face the ball of undead. With a sharp whistle, Charlotte's blade sliced through the air, tearing the mass of zombies to pieces. Every single one of them had a limb severed. Dean stared at the carnage in disbelief. He couldn't believe his eyes. Charlotte had just shredded a pile of undead in the blink of an eye. Furthermore, the zombies struck by her sword couldn't get back up or regenerate. Normally, you have to strike the head to truly finish them off, unless you possess a weapon imbued with divine power. What on earth is that sword of hers? While Dean was still stunned, Charlotte leaped off the wall, moving with lightning speed to systematically finish off the remaining zombies. Dean took it all in. To be fair, Charlotte's technique was still a bit rough. She was using raw muscle power to compensate for her lack of polished swordsmanship. But Dean was certain he wasn't seeing things. That brutal sword style was the royal sword technique of the Holy Empire, passed down to the Holy Knights. He shouted down from the wall, "Where did you learn that sword technique? Are you a member of the Holy Empire's royal family?" "I'm just a servant to the 7th Prince. And I learned this technique from a book," Charlotte said, then ran off. But because the blizzard was so fierce, Dean hadn't heard a word she said. At the same time, inside the shelter, a soldier just brought a crate full of holy water bottles to the priests. This was something Alan had been stockpiling for quite some time now. In case the priests run out of holy power, they can use these to heal everyone. "Where is His Highness?" Lord Gennett asked anxiously. The soldier reported that Alan had taken all the able-bodied soldiers outside the wall. This made Gennett incredibly restless. Not because he didn't trust the prince, but because if that were true, there would be no one left to protect the interior of the wall. At that same moment, Alan had led a few more people up to the ramparts. He was wearing a bird-beaked mask and explained to the guards that they were reinforcements. All the soldiers behind him had their faces covered too. If you looked closely, you could see they weren't among the living. The reason was that Alan had already used up all the holy water reserves, so he was forced to use his abilities as a necromancer to raise the fallen soldiers as undead to keep on fighting. That was also the reason Alan had to wear the mask. The fact that the grandson of the Holy Emperor was a necromancer definitely could not be discovered by others. The guard saw Alan carrying a strange weapon and was very confused. "Isn't that just a gun?" "That decorative piece won't do any good here," he said. Alan ignored him. The position he was standing in was perfect. He could observe the entire battlefield through the scope. Alan could see the vampire count very clearly. A mana bullet gradually began to form. This was the perfect opportunity for the monster to get a taste of the blessings of Gaia. Dian was currently managing the situation below the wall. According to another holy knight, the situation wasn't too bad yet because the ordinary soldiers were all using weapons imbued with divine power. Among them, there were a few whose skills rivaled those of the holy knights, and that included the girl, Charlotte. And we just got reinforcements from inside too. But while I was defending, what on earth is going on? A bunch of question marks appeared over Dian's head. Regardless of how they did it, as long as things weren't getting more dire, that was good enough. But the biggest problem was that they still hadn't found a way to deal with the vampire count. Close-range attacks were obviously out of the question, as it was impossible to even get near him. Long-range attacks weren't promising either, because neither ballistae nor arrows soaked in holy water could break through his magical barrier. While Dian was considering charging through the undead army to strike the vampire directly, some soldiers noticed something. On the ramparts, a person dressed as a priest, wearing a bird-beaked mask, was praying. The deputy commander said, "Look over there!" When Dian turned around, the sight left him stunned. The aura radiating from the priest was blindingly bright. Not only that, but the light was clearly shaping the image of the goddess Gaia. This was undoubtedly a blessing bestowed directly by the goddess. High on the wall, Alan was precisely aiming his barrel at the monster. "Gaia, goddess of love and altruism, please protect this small lost sheep. Please allow me to use your power to tear apart these wicked undead." This magnificent sight left Dian with his jaw dropped. Even for a high-ranking priest, receiving a direct blessing from the goddess was extremely rare. Moreover, he had never heard of any priest as powerful as this arriving in the Lonia territory. "That's His Highness!" Like a phantom, Charlotte appeared once again. She looked at Alan with eyes overflowing with pride. "I can recognize that aura from His Highness." Dian didn't quite trust those words. Alan used to blaspheme against Gaia, after all. How could he be receiving a blessing from the goddess now? This was all so contradictory. Not only Dian and Charlotte, but all the soldiers below the wall were also fixing their gazes on Alan, and with that blinding aura, a precise shot was fired. It tore through the wind at a terrifying speed along the bullet's path. Many undead were wiped out, and finally, the bullet struck true, hitting the vampire count and successfully shattering his magical shield. Alan, he had only just learned how to pray to receive blessings from the gods while reading in the cathedral. While mages use incantations and necromancers burn through their own lifespans, priests rely on prayer, and they use holy power. Although Alan possesses necromancer abilities, consuming his own lifespan isn't something he wants to do. Plus, this body is overflowing with holy power because he carries the bloodline of the Holy Emperor, so Alan researched the method of prayer and applied it right there in the battle against the vampire. That bullet, infused with divine power, didn't just shatter its shield, it severely wounded the vampire count. The vampire count panicked and ordered his undead legion to retreat. Alan felt a bit disappointed that it wasn't dead yet, but at least this bought him some time. Time to reorganize his troops and plan his next move. After the undead legion retreated, Alan realized that all the soldiers below the city walls were staring at him. He hurriedly dragged his few undead soldiers away. The soldiers below the wall couldn't stop wondering about the identity of this mysterious priest. "That's the first time I've ever seen a goddess's blessing. Is he a high-ranking priest? I don't know, but if that's the case, our wounds will be healed in no time." What a relief. Dean, at this moment, couldn't believe his eyes. In his eyes, Alan was a rebel, a useless brat who deserved to be exiled. Yet everything he witnessed himself and heard reported by the townspeople over the past few days didn't add up. The seventh prince seems to have turned into a completely different person. On top of that, he could even make a talented kid like Charlotte willingly serve him. Watching Alan's hurried silhouette as he left, Dean fell into deep thought, his mind filled with 100 questions. "Have you truly changed after losing your memories from that suicide attempt, Your Highness? Have you forgotten everything that happened 5 years ago and returned to your true self from before? I mean, the personality you had before Princess Julisha was harmed. Julisha was Alan's and the first prince's biological mother. She was just a village girl of common birth. Moreover, she was of mixed blood, half of which came from the country of Aslan in the south. For a long time, the two nations of Aslan and the Holy Empire have been at odds. Because of that, many nobles, priests, and even the current Holy Emperor himself did not approve of her. But the Holy Emperor's son, Alan's father, loved Julisha deeply. They defied the gossip to get married and quickly gave birth to the first prince. However, under pressure from the Holy Emperor, Alan's father was forced to take two noble ladies as concubines. After that, many other princes and princesses were born. Not long after, Julisha gave birth to the seventh prince, Alan. But the year he turned 10, she died. She died on a beautiful night while out for a stroll with her two sons. A vampire attacked them. The first prince was lucky to survive, but was cursed in his heart and became sickly. Alan's mother used her own life to shield him, but because of that, she was torn to pieces. A truly tragic death. That was the event that completely changed Alan's personality. The prince suffered a trauma too great. His once kind nature suddenly did a 180-degree turn. There were even rumors that he had gone insane. But the person Dean is looking at right now doesn't seem like that troublemaking madman at all. Can a person who lost their mind after a suicide attempt really return to their old personality? Of course not. It's just that the seventh prince, Alan, is truly dead and gone. But today's events have made Dean extremely concerned. Despite possessing powerful divine energy, Alan never showed it. Is it because he doesn't want to attract the attention of the Holy Emperor's family? Or is he planning his revenge? Even if Alan really wanted revenge, Dean wouldn't find it hard to understand. From the time they were small, he and the first prince never received respect from the clan or the nobles. Princess Julisha, their mother, also had to endure constant injustice, even though she was a kind and gentle person. The day Julisha passed away, Dean was there too. But he had followed the first prince's orders to go find reinforcements. It is precisely because of this that Dean has always carried a heavy heart, believing that if he had stayed there that day to fight, perhaps the princess would not have died, and the two princes would not have fallen into such a tragic state. At that moment, Dean made a decision. Regardless of why Alan is hiding his power, whether he wants revenge on the nobles or the vampires, it doesn't matter. He will definitely use all his strength to help him. But to do that, he has to resolve this problem in Lonia first. Just as he was lost in thought, a footstep caught Dean's attention. "Are you on night patrol?" Seeing that the person was a soldier, Dean asked, but the person didn't answer. He thought maybe the wind was too loud and the soldier didn't hear his question. But looking closely, something felt wrong. He's on night patrol, yet he isn't carrying a torch? Plus, his gait is very strange. Is he not human? Dean drew his sword and approached. Very quickly, he realized the person was an undead. And not just one, there were others hiding nearby. The strange thing is that the opponent doesn't give off magical energy. Diane even felt holy power when confronting them. But what does that matter? As a holy knight, Dean cannot let the undead live. The sword in his hand was raised high, ready to slash straight down into the head of the zombie soldier. "Stop!" As those words echoed, the undead stopped dead in their tracks. Diane turned around. Who else could it be but Alan? "I said stop! Lower your swords!" The situation shifted so fast it made Dean's head spin. Even if Alan tried to play dumb now, it was blindingly obvious he was a necromancer, Your Highness. Are you so desperate that you've resorted to learning necromancy? That is absolutely nothing you should be touching. I'm not sure myself, but after I ended my own life and lost my memories, I just ended up being able to control these things. Honestly, I just thought it would be useful in battle, Alan thought, wanting to blurt out that he had reincarnated. But he knew that a person with such a medieval mindset standing in front of him wouldn't believe it, or even understand it. Dean watched Alan for a long time, his expression incredibly tense. Even Alan was sweating bullets now. "Dean, are you going to investigate me?" "Naturally, that is what I should do," Dean replied firmly. Alan immediately crumbled inside. "I'm done for. I'm so done for. Would they torture him to death to get the truth out? Would Charlotte be strong enough to break him out? And even if she did, what would the two of them do after that?" A million why questions flooded Alan's mind. Suddenly, Dean dropped to one knee before him. There's no mistake. It was a gesture of absolute respect and loyalty from a vassal, leaving Alan stunned. "But I won't do that to you," Diane said, his tone rock solid. "No matter what happens, I will support you until the very end, Your Highness." Dean's serious face left Alan wide-eyed. He didn't have the memories of this body's original owner. So, after meeting Dian, Alan had always assumed the man despised him. But this expression and this oath of loyalty didn't seem fake at all. Dian could easily have captured Alan for interrogation. There was no need to lie to win his favor. Wait, you just want to keep an eye on me, don't you? Even so, Alan couldn't bring himself to fully trust the guy yet. No, Your Highness. Just like when you were young. Before Dian could finish explaining, Alan cut him off. Let's save the heart-to-heart for later. There's something more important that we need to handle right now. Alan gazed into the distance. The moon is full and blood-red tonight. I think it's time, Dian. They won't waste this precious opportunity with so much mana in the air. In the dim, blood-red moonlight, Alan smiled at Dian. Merry Christmas, Dian. And, a late happy Halloween to you, too. Dian stared at him like he was losing his mind. Christmas? Halloween? What in the world is that? It seemed the seventh prince hadn't just lost his memories, he'd learned a whole new language that nobody else could understand. But that didn't matter as much as the fact that the army of the undead was once again surrounding the fortress walls. They were still commanded by the vampire count, but in the dark of night. Blessed by the dark power in their blood, their aggression had multiplied. Rise, my undead brethren. Our era has come. Devour the living and evolve. And I shall make you kings on this battlefield. Following the count's call, the bloodlust of the undead surged. On the other side, Lord Ganat led a squadron of soldiers into the fray personally. But the atmosphere was grim and desperate. The sheer overwhelming power of the undead was crushing the soldiers' morale. Ganat had even considered retreating and regrouping, but Alan appeared just in time to turn the tide. Of course, he couldn't show his face. So he appeared once again as the mysterious priest in the plague doctor mask. Upon appearing, Alan immediately began to pray, just as he had before. Great Gaio, please bestow your blessing upon the soldiers fighting alongside me. With that prayer, the debuff and plague skills were simultaneously triggered against the enemy. In the blink of an eye, the zombies weakened significantly. Conversely, the soldiers who received the blessing felt their energy surging. Ganat seized the moment to rally their spirits. The priest is on our side! The god Gaio is with us! As if they had been given a surge of adrenaline, the soldiers instantly shed their fear and weakness, charging into the enemy ranks. A massive battle broke out. Blood, screams, and the clashing of metal weapons filled the air. God of War him, please lend me your strength. Besides Alan, Dian was also proving very useful. Despite his IQ occasionally being questionable, he was quite the combatant. He held off countless undead on his own, but his sole target was the leader himself, the vampire count sitting smugly on his throne. The vampire count was furious. The wound from the bullet Alan had gifted him earlier wouldn't heal. Now Alan had stepped in to ruin his plan to wipe out Lonya, making him absolutely livid. Dian tried to break through the encirclement to attack him, but the vampire count was faster than anyone expected. He didn't even bother looking at Dian. Stop that vampire! He's heading for the priest! Dian shouted in panic. Possessing the skull of the necromancer king, Ammon made this guy seem invincible. Ordinary soldiers, even Dian, couldn't stop him. But Alan had already anticipated this. How was chugging bottles of holy water? Now, it was just a matter of time before the vampire count found him, so he had to reach a favorable position. He hoped the thick walls of the territory would make it hard for the count to follow. But things didn't go as planned. While Alan was running for his life, a boulder the size of a house fell from the sky. He dove out of the way just in time. If that had hit him, Alan would have been flattened like a bug. How funny. You think you can stop me with a few measly rocks? Die, you wretched priest! The enemy's terrifying appearance made Alan feel a bit dizzy. It really was true. Life never lets you enjoy the fruits of your labor that easily. Still, you had already anticipated the worst-case scenario. The plan was set in motion the moment Alan called out. Scarlet appeared in her farmhand form, hefting a boulder even larger than the one the Count had used earlier. She hurled it toward Alan with a deafening crash. The impact sounded like a bolt of lightning striking right beside their ears. Scarlet used the boulder as a makeshift shield in front of Alan, but the vampire count's magic was overwhelming. He feared the rock shield wouldn't hold for much longer, and besides, even though Scarlet is strong, she hasn't fully mastered her power yet. If this keeps up, both of them will be roasted alive by the opponent's magic. Scarlet's arms trembled as she braced the slab when suddenly another pair of rough, weathered hands appeared to help. It was Grill, the kind-hearted braggart who had adopted her as his daughter, even though he had no magical power at all. "But I must help you hold it." What a touching scene of fatherly love, though without any real strength. It wouldn't help much. Alan struggled to his feet from the ground, gritting his teeth. Both hands began channeling holy power into the boulder. Even after his reincarnation, Alan hadn't fully mastered this body yet. But if he could reinforce the stone shield with holy power, they might have a chance to turn the tide. Gaia, please grant me the strength to protect these innocent lambs. Please grant us your protection to hold back the encroaching death. Grant us your love and mercy. Alan clenched his teeth, feeling his body reaching its absolute limit. Seriously, God, I've prayed with all my heart already. Please help me. And sure enough, as if blessed with the main character's aura, at the very moment of life and death, Gaia truly answered. The rough, ugly rock was transformed into a massive, ornate shield with beautiful patterns and, naturally, overflowing divine power. Even the vampire count couldn't have predicted this would happen. I was sent reeling back by the shield's redirected power. A massive explosion erupted, leaving everything in ruins. Uncle Grill was knocked aside and Scarlet anxiously rushed over to him. Thankfully, he was only unconscious. On the other side, the vampire count had taken such a heavy hit that he lost his rich, bloated appearance. Now, he looked like nothing more than a pathetic, common zombie. Alan was also drained of his holy power. He didn't want to risk another attack, so he ordered Scarlet to take Grill and retreat. But as they prepared to leave, something made Alan stop. He noticed that the dark energy wasn't gathering around the vampire, but rather hovering around Eamon's skull. Driven by curiosity, Alan immediately picked it up. The system told him this item could amplify the user's magic from 20% to 200%, depending on their ability. Furthermore, it increased recovery and other related skills by 10%. Seeing Eamon's skull in Alan's hands, the vampire count went berserk. Even though he was severely wounded, he recklessly lunged forward trying to seize it back, but it was too late. Alan had already placed it on his head. I am the servant and the heir of Gaia. Once Alan became the new master and successfully activated the power of the skull of Eamon, chains woven from holy power surged from all four directions. They bound the vampire count tightly, leaving him completely unable to move. Facing Alan, this creature could smell the lingering scent of death. You, he stammered. There was no mistake. The one before him was a heretic who defied the laws of this world. But Alan's pressure was so immense that the Count couldn't utter another word. All servants, heed my command! With that single, simple order from Alan, the entire giant legion of the undead knelt in unison. Even the vampire Count was no exception. My lord, please give us your orders. This scene terrified him. His entire army of the undead was now under Alan's control. Furthermore, they even possessed their own ego and holy power. This was entirely outside the laws of nature, an absurdity he had never witnessed. Impossible! This went against the will of Judai, the god of death. The vampire Count seemed to be the only one not completely controlled by Alan. He roared in anger and despair, but the outcome of this battle was already clear. Alan's gun barrel pointed directly at the vampire Count's head. I have a gift for you. His index finger gently pulled the trigger. In the name of a priest, Merry Christmas, little vampire. Bang! A bullet charged with holy power shot out, piercing the vampire Count's head. What would his fate be? There was no longer anything to debate after that shot. Alan also collapsed. Both his holy power and physical strength were completely spent. Fortunately, the battle's outcome was settled. The army of over 20,000 undead vanished one by one amidst the joyful cheers of the soldiers. At the same time, not far from Lonia Fortress, reinforcements arrived. I heard there were abnormal signs of undead on this land. I thought the undead King Amun had returned, but it turns out it was just a common vampire with some cheap tricks. The leader of the group was the Holy Emperor, Kelton Phones. I was 105 years old, but still extremely robust. Even though the battle was over, Kelton still felt something was very strange because just now, he could sense traces of a massive collision between dark magic and divine power. That vampire was able to gather up to 20,000 troops, proving his power wasn't ordinary. So who could have defeated him? Or had someone sacrificed themselves like a saint? This thought by the Holy Knights wasn't unreasonable. Kelton was too lazy to investigate further. He spurred his horse to turn around. Then, he ordered his troops to take the priests and medics in the group into the city to care for the wounded, while he would return to the capital. "My lord, the seventh prince is also here. Would you like to meet him?" The Holy Knight's question made Kelton stop his horse, but his subsequent attitude was enough to scare the man to death. "I meet the seventh prince?" The entire army following Kelton trembled in unison. The aura of this king was truly too overwhelming. Just his words alone made one unable to stop. "Let's head back, shall we? There's no need to see that wretched seventh prince who insulted his own mother. He's probably shivering in a corner of the mansion right now." Kyo returned to the royal palace shortly after. Dianhamen also returned, bringing back news that left everyone, including the Holy Emperor, completely stunned. "Your Majesty, the seventh prince is the one who defeated the vampire that attacked the stronghold." Kyo, who was leaning back on his throne, bolted upright. He thought he had misheard while the nobles below began to scoff. The seventh prince killed a vampire? That was clearly the most ridiculous joke they had heard in years. Kyo rubbed his temples, his mind a tangled mess of complex thoughts. "The prince you're referring to, is it Alan Alphonse?" he asked, suspicious. "Yes, Your Majesty," Dian confirmed firmly. "While volunteering at the Lonia territory, His Highness was the one who took down that vampire." One would expect Kyo to be shocked, happy, or perhaps even more skeptical, but his reaction was far more extreme than anyone could have imagined. His hand gripped the throne tightly. Veins bulged on his hands and forehead. "Haman, I thought you were an honest and upright man. Turns out you're not. Do you want to die that badly, you bastard?" His roar echoed throughout the chambers. Even Raphael, the elderly advisor close to the king, couldn't believe Alan was capable of such a feat. He assumed the seventh prince had stolen someone else's credit, but facing that terrifying pressure, Din remained steadfast. Perhaps because of this attitude, Kelt's anger subsided slightly, and although he couldn't verify the truth of Dian's report, he still issued rewards. Generous rewards were given to those who contributed to defending the territory. Lord Ganat Lepang was promoted to Count, and the Holy Knight Dian. Haman was granted a small territory in the northwest. "And one more thing," Kyo pondered for a long time. "I will shorten the seventh prince's exile as soon as he recovers. I will summon him back to the palace." After being dismissed, Dian took off his armor and went to a small, dark room in the palace, lighting a single candle. Lying on the bed was someone wrapped head to toe in bandages, leaving only his eyes, nose, and mouth exposed, looking exactly like a mummy. It was Luan Alphonse, the first prince and Alan's own brother. Luan's body was frail, like a candle flickering in the wind. It was uncertain how much longer he had left. "I've heard about what happened on the battlefield." Luan gestured for Dian to come closer. He seemed to summon all his remaining strength, grabbing Dian's collar aggressively. "You protected the seventh prince from his majesty? Protecting that trash who tarnished our mother's reputation? Dianhamen, have you lost your mind?" Luan's rage peaked, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like a terrifying mummy risen from the grave. "Hammon, is it because you think I'm dying soon so you're trying to cling to that bastard? Right? It's a pity you picked the wrong side. Out of everyone, you chose to side with a lowlife." Luan used so much force that his arm began to bleed, soaking the bandages and staining a patch of Dian's collar red. He gradually calmed down, trying to breathe, and regained his usual gentle, mild demeanor. "I'm sorry. I know you're not that kind of person. You don't need to apologize, Your Highness. This isn't your fault or the seventh prince's. From the beginning, I should have been the one responsible for the death of Princess Julisha, regardless of what orders I received. I should have stayed at my post." Luan had never blamed Dian. If he hadn't left to find reinforcements back then, all four of them would have died. Thanks to the reinforcements, Luan, Alan, and Dian were still alive. Even so, because of that corrosive curse, Luan's skin was rotting away, and he wasn't far from death. "Your Highness, do you hate the seventh prince?" Luan didn't need to think to answer Dian's question. Hate him? Of course he hated him. He loathed Alan to the bone. Their mother had sacrificed herself to protect him, only to be torn to shreds by a vampire. Yet, Alan used the life his mother gave him to act like a lowlife. Dean had felt the same way. But after his time in Lonia, he thought differently. What if the seventh prince is deliberately acting like a lowlife? Dian poured out his heart to Luan. He believed Alan was pretending, and that everything was a cover for his true intention of avenging Princess Julisha, and to achieve that, he acted like scum and intentionally got himself exiled. Only after leaving the family's supervision could Alan freely build up his own power. Hammond, Luan cut off Dian's rambling. Where are you sick? Did that battle damage your head? Luan felt that Dian had lost his mind. Otherwise, how could his thinking change 180 degrees like that? Knowing he couldn't explain it to the prince in an instant, Dian stopped mentioning Alan. Soon, he would have to return to Lonya to carry out the Emperor's orders. Oh, if it's his order. Luan's eyes suddenly turned incredibly cold. Then that bastard is probably coming back soon. It's been 3 days since that life-or-death battle. The Lonya territory is showing signs of life again, thanks to the prisoners and the few remaining healthy citizens cleaning up the ruins. Real is among them. While sweeping, a pile of old junk catches his eye. It's all leftovers from the undead. Real is a man who loves money, so when he sees these things, his eyes light up instantly. If these belong to the undead from centuries ago, that means they're ownerless antiques, right? If he cleans them up, they'll shine like new. He might even make a fortune. Thinking that, Real looks around cautiously, and once he confirms no one is watching, he starts digging through the pile. Inside are mostly old clothes and jewelry, but there's one piece of paper, like a letter, that is perfectly preserved without a single scratch. Real picks it up and examines it carefully, wondering if it's worth anything. At the same time, Alan has just woken up. He's been in a coma for 3 straight days. Charlotte brings in a mountain of food to help him recover. Earlier, the healer who examined Alan said it was a miracle he woke up at all, given the exhaustion of holy power he went through. It was so severe it could have left him crippled. Thankfully, after taking medicine and replenishing his holy power, Alan was able to wake up. While he was unconscious, the healer also examined Charlotte. I was stunned to find she has a superhuman constitution, which reminded him of the Holy Emperor 55 years ago when he defeated the undead king, Ammon Kelt. Kelt had fallen into a deep coma because his body suffered extreme damage from the conflict between holy power and dark magic. At that time, Kelt's body had evolved far beyond human limits. That is the difference in aptitude between a hero and an ordinary person, and now he is seeing that same quality in Charlotte. After the healer left, Alan observed Charlotte for a long time. She truly possesses a supernatural body and many other qualities that would make anyone green with envy. This makes Alan feel a bit ashamed. Someone like Charlotte should have been a hero, not following around a cunning guy like him. Seeing Alan staring at her, Charlotte can't help but wonder, "What is it, Your Highness?" "Oh, it's nothing. I'm just a bit bored, so could you bring me some books?" Alan sighs. That last battle really drained him. Ammon's remains are a godly artifact, but they ultimately belong to the darkness. His body, filled with this much holy power, couldn't withstand the conflict. Charlotte brings over a stack of books. After the recent battle, Alan realized the importance of knowledge, so he is determined to devour all this dry information regarding holy power, as well as finding a way to control those zombies effectively. But he hasn't been reading long before there's a knock at the door. Dian has returned. He brings important news. Alan's eyes light up because he thinks Dian is bringing another mountain of reward money like when he took down Morgana back at the village. "Your Highness, the Emperor has ordered your return to the Imperial Palace." As soon as those words are out, Alan freezes in shock. Once he processes the information, Alan immediately kicks Dian out and locks the door. He doesn't want to go back to the palace at all. That place is full of danger. To this day, Alan still hasn't found the mastermind behind the Morgana case, so he decides to just stay holed up in his room and ignore Dian. But what Alan didn't expect was that Din is even more stubborn than he is. For the days that followed, he uses every trick to invite, persuade, and drag Alan back to the palace. Dian's persistence makes Alan go nearly insane, until one day he has to send a message to Dean through Charlotte. Dian is thrilled, thinking Alan finally agreed to return, but he never expected that what Alan sent to the Holy Knight could be summed up in just a few words. "Get lost before I burn your spirit away." This time, it's Dian who freezes in shock, but this guy is more persistent than imagined. Night has fallen, and Charlotte plans to return to the house she and her adoptive father, Real, rented near the estate. Dian insists on taking her back because he wants to hear the reason why Alan refuses to return to the palace. The prince says the palace is a dangerous place. That is all Charlotte knows. Dian thinks for a long time. It's true that in the palace, the seventh prince's position isn't very strong. This casual remark from Dian triggers a lot of thoughts in Charlotte's mind. So her suspicions were right. Alan's life is being threatened by his own family. She clenches her hands into fists. At times like these, Charlotte just wishes she could be stronger. The two return home. Real is waiting. Dian recognizes him because Real bragged so much during the Morgana incident that Dian remembers his face. The two stand in the yard talking. Charlotte goes inside first and notices something strange on the table. It's the piece of paper that Real picked up earlier. He didn't know what it was, but one glance from Dian and he can see it's a family tree. However, the seal on the paper leaves Dian stunned for a long time because it is the seal of the Harris family. This is the family that protected the northern Lonia region 55 years ago. The entire family sacrificed themselves heroically in the bloody battle against the undead King Ammon. The Harris were the most loyal family to the Holy Emperor. Dian has always respected them. Because of this family tree, Dian assumes that Charlotte and Real are the last remaining descendants of the Harris family. I don't know whether to call this guy naive or dim-witted, but with that belief, Dian suddenly becomes very enthusiastic. He voluntarily writes a letter of introduction as a holy knight for Real and Charlotte, and also promises that once in the palace, Charlotte can learn proper swordsmanship from the top knights. When she becomes his right-hand woman, the seventh prince will be well protected. Charlotte's eyes light up when she hears this. She certainly has no reason to refuse. Even though Dian has a serious misunderstanding about their background, if she can continue to accompany Alan, Charlotte doesn't see the point in explaining the truth to Dian anymore. When Dian returns to the Lord's estate, Alan has agreed to return to the Imperial Palace with him. Along the way, Dian keeps wondering what made him change his mind. After all, just yesterday, Alan was slamming doors and threatening to burn his spirit away. Well, the real reason is that those books Alan read yesterday were so interesting, and that was only the first part. He is very curious about the follow-ups, and the Royal Library has every book imaginable, Alan thinks. I've decided that once I'm back at the palace, I'm locking myself in the library all day for my own sanity. After a long ride in the carriage, they finally return to Lawrence. This place really is the capital. The hustle and bustle is enough to make anyone dizzy. Dian honestly told him how the place had flourished in the years since Alan was exiled. Do you like it, Your Highness? Dian asked, assuming Alan would be thrilled to be back at court. But to his and Scarlett's shock, Alan spat out two words: disgusting. He whipped out a handkerchief and pressed it tightly against his nose. Dian, let me ask you something. Don't tell me there are zombies in the capital of the Holy Empire. Darting through the crowded streets, Alan ran like a man possessed. He couldn't be wrong. He couldn't possibly mistake this sensation. To the naked eye, it looked like a peaceful street, but Alan was certain that deep down, a vampire lurked. He quickly picked up the distinct scent of death and bolted after it as if his life depended on it. Scarlett and Dian rushed to follow him. The three of them reached a dead-end alley, where they found a wooden box filled with roses, topped with a human head. To be precise, it was the head of a young woman, and it was wailing. Holy crap, what is that? It scared the living daylights out of them, but before they could even react, the head suddenly opened its eyes. Its eyes, red as blood, glared viciously at Alan. Then it opened its mouth and let out a piercing, long-drawn-out shriek. Scarlett and Dian couldn't take it. They had to cover their ears immediately. Only Alan remained unaffected. He drew his sword and slashed down at the target in one clean motion, finally silencing that wretched sound. Is it a zombie? Scarlett finally steadied herself. Alan looked up. In front of him was a corpse hanging on a clothesline, presumably the body that had belonged to. It looked like the internal organs had been completely ripped out, leaving nothing but skin and bone. What an absolutely nauseating sight. You're being watched! A strange voice echoed, giving Alan a fright. Your Highness, are you okay? Dian asked, worried. They had just returned to the capital, and already so much chaos had broken out. Alan only caught a fleeting glance of the voice's owner, the one who had been tracking them. It was a middle-aged man with red hair who bolted the moment he locked eyes with Alan. Dian suspected he was likely the culprit, and Alan agreed. But for now, they couldn't track him anymore because the scent of death had already permeated everything. So, Alan decided to head back to the palace with Deanne for now, though he still had a gut feeling that something bad was about to happen. Once they reached the palace, Alan learned that the capital, Lawrence, had been in total chaos lately. Several similar decapitation murders had taken place, and the citizens all over the capital were in a panic, terrorized by those mysterious killings. Things weren't peaceful in the palace either, now that the rascal seventh prince was back. Even Alan couldn't catch a break because ever since they returned, Dean had been yapping in his ear like a broken record, nagging him about this and that. "I said I get it. Why are you such a chatterbox?" "You're still just a child, Your Highness." Dean shrugged. Alan was furious but couldn't argue. This body, it really did belong to an underage kid. Scarlet planned to take a tour of the palace, and Dean agreed to protect her under his name. Alan slipped off to the library. After all, his main goal in returning was to find books on magic. Still, all the way there, he kept catching whiffs of the scent of death, though it was faint. At first, Alan thought he was just being paranoid, but after a while, he was pretty sure that vampires had infiltrated the palace. This made Alan even more uneasy. He started debating whether to stay put like Deanne told him, or just grab the books he needed and run for it. Alan wandered around for a bit, still not finding the library, until his eyes accidentally caught sight of a statue in the garden. Curious, he went to take a look, and by doing so he bumped into a gardener. The man didn't seem very happy, probably because the brats assigned to help had all run off. Everything ends up falling to this old man. Should I just slit their throats and use them as decorations? Alan broke into a cold sweat. Palace gardeners these days were as grumpy as a serial killer. Good grief. The old gardener kept on grumbling. Alan, who had been hiding behind the statue, was soon spotted. "Hey, you little brat! If you're already here, you should know how to open your mouth and greet someone." Naturally, he didn't know Alan's identity, which was why he dared to act that way. But it didn't stop there. The old gardener ordered him to bring over a shovel. Alan wanted to refuse, but the old guy looked so fierce he didn't dare. So, under the other man's death ray glare, the noble seventh prince had to stoop down and haul a heavy bag of soil as requested. "Is this enough, then?" Alan dropped the bag to the ground. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here. If you're done, I'm leaving." Alan intended to walk away, but then he saw the man's hands, covered in mud, and he felt a pang of sympathy. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, the one Scarlet had given him a few days ago. "Wipe your hands, and if you can, don't kill yourself working alone. Call someone else to help." The man fell silent, pondering for a moment, then slowly reached out. But he didn't take the handkerchief. Instead, he gripped Alan's wrist roughly. Alan was startled. "Hey, I wasn't actually planning to slit his throat and hang him up as a decoration, was he? Wait, what are you doing? You really have lost your mind, haven't you, kid?" The man reached up and took off the wide-brimmed hat that had been obscuring his face. "Not only has your personality changed, but now you don't even recognize your own grandfather?" The next day, Alan was ordered to present himself before the Holy Emperor. Thinking back to that moment in the garden, he felt a shiver down his spine. Who on earth would have thought that old guy? In the garden was the Holy Emperor himself? As soon as you stepped into the holy sanctuary, the Emperor spoke up. "I heard you played a major role in taking down the enemy in Lonia, and I also heard you defeated a vampire count. Is that true?" Alan thought for a few seconds. Even the commoners in Laurentia knew about this. If that were the case, there was no way the wise and brilliant emperor wouldn't know that a vampire was behind the whole incident. That is why, instead of being recognized for his contributions in Lonia, the emperor was now calculating how to find someone capable of capturing that vampire. Along with confirming the facts of the event, thinking this far, Alan decided to be honest. "Yes, Your Majesty, it was indeed my doing, but I could not have captured him alone." Alan began to recount the contributions of those who had helped him, from the knight, Charlotte, to Lord Janat, and even Reel. Even though in reality they didn't help him much, Alan still wanted to share the credit with everyone, partly because he didn't want to stand out too much, and he also wanted to have others to share the burden of his troubles. The Emperor stared at him for a long time, then let out a sigh. "I understand what you've said." The Emperor's complexion didn't look very good, but Alan couldn't guess what he was thinking. The Emperor allowed him to go and rest. After Alan left, the entire hall fell dead silent. The Emperor fell into deep thought. This young leopard cub, Just half a year ago, he was still a reckless, selfish, and foolish delinquent. But now, he found Alan to be very confident and honest. He admitted his own merits and the help of others, and was even keen enough to notice the presence of the vampire nearby. The Emperor was extremely troubled, although Alan's changes were all positive. Could a person who lost his memory really have his personality change 180 degrees like that? I was also concerned about Charlotte and Real. It was all because of that disastrous misunderstanding that Dian Vici had reported that they were the survivors of the Jerez family. This family was not only famous for their swordsmanship, but also for their magic. If that information was true, they could truly become the core of the vampire hunting effort. Furthermore, the Emperor also received some intelligence from Lord Janat. The report stated that a mysterious young man had saved countless lives with his holy magic. And there was also the story about a goddess descending to bless him after he prayed. And finally, that this young man had defeated a vampire count with only a decorative gun from the room. Although the young man wore a mask the entire time those events took place, Janat assured the Emperor that the person was Alan. Originally, the Emperor thought it was just baseless rumors, but he didn't expect that when he asked Alan today, he would frankly admit it. He immediately asked for the opinions of the ministers below. They immediately split into two camps. One side argued that Alan was lying and taking credit for himself, while the other side believed he was indeed the masked young hero. The whole hall erupted into an argument. The Emperor clutched his head. He was already at an age where he would soon have to step down from the throne. But among his current descendants, he didn't even have an aide, let alone a successor. The Emperor remembered Julia and the events of that year, then blamed himself. In any case, he was partly to blame for being too cold and prioritizing the safety of the kingdom over his own descendants. Remembering how Alan looked just now, a spark of hope flared in the Emperor's heart. Does this leopard cub have a chance after all? The Emperor was deeply troubled, while the ministers below were still frantically arguing. The train of thought was broken, making the Emperor furious. Finally, unable to take it anymore, he roared, "You idiots! If you don't want to be stabbed to death by my own hand, shut your mouths right now!" The three loudmouths went silent at once. Just then, someone else stepped into the hall. "Your Majesty, please calm down." The person who had just arrived was Count Pomor, close to Prince Luan. He believed there was still plenty of time, and the Emperor could investigate a little further. After all, the next 2 months would mark the death anniversary of Princess Julia, and Alan would be staying in the palace until then. Investigating him would be convenient. The Emperor agreed with this. If that's the case, then do as you say. As for the leopard cub Alan, he knew absolutely nothing about being secretly investigated. His only concern was finding the library. It was already quite late when Alan managed to find his way there, but as soon as he pushed the door open and stepped inside, a flustered female voice rang out. "Seventh Prince Alan?" He was exhausted. He didn't think there would still be someone in the library at such a late hour. Seeing Alan, the girl looked as if she had seen a ghost. She hurriedly apologized and prepared to leave immediately. "Just stay where you are, it's fine." The girl seemed terrified. Alan also noticed her urgency. He found it strange. He hadn't even done anything, so why was she acting like she was about to be eaten alive? But upon observing her more closely, fragmented memories belonging to the original owner of this body flooded back. This girl looked so familiar. Alan realized who it was. This was Alice Astoria, 17 years old, the granddaughter of the Archbishop. It was the original owner of this body, and precisely because he had provoked her, he had been sent away to the land of the undead. No wonder Alice looked so uncomfortable. Alan sighed. She must have thought that pervert was looking for her again. One more thing caught Alan's attention. Her last name was the same as the author of the book he was looking for. This made Alan suspect that the person who wrote that book was the venerable Archbishop. Just thinking about it gave Alan a headache. After everything the original owner of this body had done, he didn't dare to face the Archbishop and his granddaughter again. "Sorry for startling you, I lost my memory, so I've almost forgotten everyone in the palace," Alan said sincerely, even though he wasn't at fault. But since he was in this body, he should show some remorse. Alice still maintained her cold, distant attitude. Alan understood. If he were her, he wouldn't believe these words either. Well then it wasn't necessary to get close to her anyway. He slipped away, intending to grab the book and leave immediately. But when he reached the shelf where the book should have been, it was empty. Alan slumped. Had he gone through all that trouble to find the library just to leave empty-handed? Are you looking for the Archbishop's books by any chance? A voice called out from behind. It was Alice holding it. Alan felt awkward, but she handed it to him. It was a book about resurrection, but Alice thought this book was just her grandfather's research notes and nothing special. After all, when people talk about resurrection, they immediately dismiss it as impossible. Why is resurrection considered impossible? Alan reached out to take the book, seizing the chance to ask further since Alice seemed to have lowered her guard a bit. Because no matter how much life holy power can grant someone, it cannot capture a soul that has already left the body. Only necromancy can capture a soul. But in Alice's mind, necromancy was a terrifying practice, and the practitioner would have to pay a terrible price. So, Alice remained convinced that resurrecting the dead was completely impossible. Well then, what if someone possessed both holy power and magic power? She was stunned for a few seconds, silently wondering if Alan had lost his mind along with his memories. She noted that such cases were extremely rare, and anyone using both types of power simultaneously would have their body explode. Even so, Alan did not give up hope on performing this resurrection ritual. He flipped through this Archbishop's book, which noted that to use holy power more effectively, one should pray more. Witches could use mana and incantations, while dark mages used magic power and their own lifespan. He was truly curious if there was any way more effective than just praying. While lost in thought, Alan unconsciously asked the question aloud, and Alice actually answered him. If you are asking for a more effective way than prayer, you could use magical tools. But you just said it was possible to resurrect the dead. What did you mean by that? Alan suddenly snapped back to reality. He had completely forgotten that Alice hated his guts and that she was preparing to leave. The two of them had lingered too long, and it was already quite late, so Alan hurriedly urged her to go back. You still seem annoyed with me. You don't need to deny it, just go home. I didn't mean it like that. Alice denied it, flustered, but Alan pushed her straight out the door. The library door slammed shut, leaving her standing there confused, filled with a million questions. Their conversation about resurrection was still far from over. Furthermore, during this encounter, Alice felt that the seventh prince was somehow different. It wasn't his appearance, but his aura. It was completely unlike the person who had harassed her before. Just as Alice was lost in thought, a voice called out. It was the Archbishop, an elderly man with snow-white hair and a monocle, looking very intellectual. What is my granddaughter doing here at this hour? I was studying in the library, grandfather. The Archbishop nodded. He knew Alice was curious and eager to learn, but it was late at night, and an old man like him had to go out of his way to warn her that the seventh prince had returned to the palace. Alice wanted to say something but stopped herself. The Archbishop handed her a mask. Alice took it naturally, as if she were very accustomed to this. She and her grandfather went to Prince Luan's room. As usual, they were there to treat him. Besides the Archbishop and Alice, a few others were participating in the treatment. But Luan's body did not seem to respond. He kept screaming and writhing, his eyes rolling back in his head, looking even worse than a zombie. Alice felt incredibly helpless. Faced with the Grand Prince's cursed body, even her holy power was ineffective. Alice knew what this meant. Luan didn't have much time left. Even so, she wanted to find some way to save this poor Grand Prince. And suddenly, Alice remembered what Alan had said earlier. I still think that we might be able to pull off this resurrection. It was such an absurd thought. Alice knew it was impossible, but she couldn't stop herself from dwelling on those words. And if resurrection could truly be achieved, how wonderful that would be. Meanwhile, in Alice's private quarters, Dianhaman had just brought over a stack of papers. They were all dossiers on members of the royal family. After all, Alice had no memories of the original owner, so she had to thoroughly understand the situation to know how to cope. It's just that among the documents Dian brought, there was very little information about the biological parents of this body. What? No information about my parents, Alan? He complained. Do you need information on them too? After all, you remember them, don't you? You still think I'm faking my amnesia? Alan snapped, annoyed. I've told you how many times now that I don't remember a damn thing. Dian was still as suspicious as ever. Alan demanded that Dian tell him everything about his parents. Dian looked sad, saying they were both still alive. Their lives were completely normal. Alan was speechless. This is what you call providing information? Is that all? Yes, Your Highness. Alan stared at the other man. Even though Deanne was a big, tough guy who was good at fighting, he was truly a fool. Look at that expression. He really didn't know how to lie. Alan genuinely wanted to know about the relationships between family members, but this was very suspicious. Deanne hurriedly changed the subject to the upcoming banquet and urged Alan to prepare quickly. He gave a look of extreme boredom. Is it really necessary to prepare? Of course it is. If you do something wrong, you might be mocked. Scarlet is currently studying palace etiquette so that she won't embarrass you, Your Highness. Living among such a serious bunch was exhausting for Alan, but Deanne kept pestering him to go and prepare. This is a grand banquet, not just a casual meal. Furthermore, at this banquet, the Grand Prince might also be attending. Alan paused for a moment upon hearing the title Grand Prince, but he had no impression of this character whatsoever. Who is that? Deanne sighed, pointing to a figure on the genealogy chart he had just brought over. Luan Alphonse, your brother. He is the one you should be most wary of right now. At the same time, Luan had also heard news about the welcome banquet for Alan, only his expression didn't look too good. Not very pleased, and with that cursed body of his, he looks even more terrifying. Does trash like him really deserve a welcome banquet? The banquet was crowded with guests. Alice appeared in a beautiful formal gown, attracting many compliments. In truth, the Archbishop didn't want her to come here at all, but since he wasn't attending, she felt she couldn't be absent. While Alice was busy mingling with guests, she heard someone calling her name. It was Count Fomo. As soon as he appeared, hushed whispers broke out all around. Look, it's Count Fomo. They say he's very popular with the people lately. I heard he has no interest in power. His hobby is just doing pointless charity work. These words reached Alice's ears. She was about to lift her dress to start an argument, but Fomo stopped her. After all, those words weren't entirely wrong. After Fomo's wife passed away, the only reason he kept living was to do charity. In Alice's impression, Fomo was indeed a good person. He used to serve Her Highness Julicia, and now he is a loyal subject supporting the Grand Prince. Instead of seizing power, Fomo seems to care more about Luan's health, and he is someone who always speaks up for the people. But she didn't know if those things were the truth or just a perfect mask. Alice couldn't explain why she felt a bit uncomfortable when dealing with this man. She tactfully made an excuse to leave. She hadn't gone many steps before she ran into Lord Janot, but his stiff, almost comical appearance didn't look much like the style of a lord. Oh, even a rural lord like me received an invitation to a luxurious place like this? Janot's teeth were chattering uncontrollably. Looking closely, next to him was Grill, who was also wearing a dapper suit. Lord Janot, you can't be this nervous now. Look at me, I'm just a commoner. Where is the seventh prince? How could he leave us in this place? The awkward appearance of the two made Alice burst into laughter. It had been a long time since she attended a banquet, and she didn't want to be around people who were too hung up on etiquette. So she approached Lord Janot to start a conversation. The entire scene caught Count Fomo's eye, and he didn't know if it was a mistake, but his gaze was filled with danger. Under the protection of the Holy Empire, Prince Alan Alphonse was entering the banquet hall. The announcement was made in a loud voice. Alan entered the grand hall in a neat outfit, followed by Charlotte and Diane. From within the crowd, Count Fomo cautiously cast a probing look at him. Alan slumped onto the sofa in boredom. He had thought that today no one would pay attention to him because Alan is a prince with no right to the throne and was even exiled. But unexpectedly, just because he brought Charlotte along, many eyes were drawn to this side. You look more aristocratic than I do. Alan assessed his maid from head to toe. Charlotte really looked beautiful and charismatic today. It seems those tutoring classes of hers were worth it after all. That is my natural posture, Your Highness. It's not something you can get just by studying for a short time, Deanne added. What do you mean by that? You mean my natural posture is terrible, don't you? Alan was about to spar verbally with Deanne for a bit when Count Fomo proactively approached. He wore a gentle, respectful face to greet them. But of course, Alan had no impression of this man. Deanne hurriedly reminded him to keep the demeanor of a prince while introducing Count Fomo's identity. I didn't hold any grudges against Alan either, proactively reaching out his hand. It's been a long time, so it's understandable that you've forgotten me. Forgive me for not being by your side during your most difficult times. Your Highness. For some reason, Alan just found this man a bit fake, enough to make him allergic. But out of politeness, he still reached out to shake the man's hand. Based on the files Deanne provided, Alan learned that this person used to serve his mother in the past and is currently supporting his brother. Luan. However, when looking through this man's information via the system, Alan was shocked to his core. This respectable-looking man was actually a vampire, and what's more, he was in a bloodthirsty state. Whether it was intentional or accidental, FOMO's handshake suddenly tightened. Alan also inadvertently released his holy power as a form of self-defense, but the man didn't react at all. "Do you like the food at the banquet today?" Alan tried to regain his composure. "Yeah, the food is good." "That's a relief. It's been a long time since you've enjoyed royal cuisine." Now Alan understood where the discomfort with this man came from. He just didn't understand how long he had been in the palace. Why, after all these years, had no one discovered FOMO's true identity? He tilted his head to observe the guests at the party and suddenly discovered another terrifying truth. Besides FOMO, there were other vampires disguised as nobles. Alan wobbled as he stood up. "Come to think of it, I just remembered something that makes me very disappointed during the meal." FOMO asked with an, "Oh? What is that?" Alan waved to a servant to get another glass of wine. Then he brought it in front of FOMO. Of course, it's the wine. "While dining, having no good wine is really boring. Why don't you have a glass, noble count?" FOMO comfortably reached out to take the glass of wine. Alan laughed inwardly. He had poured his holy power into it and turned this wine into holy water. As soon as FOMO drinks it, his true face will be exposed. Alan was also quite sure that the shadow stalking him when he first returned to the capital was this very guy. So, he must be the one behind that incident. But what's shocking is that FOMO downed that whole glass of wine without any reaction at all. He even managed to keep his fake expression perfectly intact. "My apologies, I must have had a bit too much to drink. I'm feeling a little tipsy. Please forgive me, Your Highness. My tolerance for alcohol isn't that high." Alan didn't look like he bought it at all, and he reached out to grab a bottle of wine nearby as a sharp scream rang out. FOMO had drawn the attention of many guests, but Alan didn't stop his actions. He smashed the bottle, then dealt FOMO a strike so hard it made him shriek. "Your Highness, what are you doing? Please calm down!" Alan was taken aback. He had just left a deep gash on the back of FOMO's hand, but the wound didn't heal instantly. FOMO was trembling all over, looking pathetic. Alan was certain he was a vampire, but why was there no reaction to the holy water? And why didn't he have his instant regeneration? Seriously. At that moment, Alan hurriedly pulled the leopard cub behind his back. "Count FOMO, please forgive him. It seems the prince has had too much to drink. Why don't we go inside and get you treated?" "Yes, I think that would be best. If you'll excuse me, I'll take my leave first." No sooner had he finished speaking than FOMO hurried away, leaving only Alan, Diane, and Charlotte at the scene. The two of them couldn't understand why he had acted that way. But when they heard Alan say that FOMO was a vampire, they both couldn't believe their ears. At that moment, it was Diane who lost his cool the most. He wanted to seize FOMO immediately, but Alan stopped him. They didn't have any evidence to arrest anyone yet. "Bring me paper and pen first," Alan commanded. "What are you going to do with those, Your Highness?" "What else? We're going to track the vampire. We're the only ones who know." FOMO had by now retreated into his private room. Just as Alan predicted, he was indeed a vampire. As soon as he hid behind the door, FOMO vomited everything out, the wine from earlier. His face distorted, his eyes turned stark white, and his fangs grew out rapidly. That damned prince! FOMO was certain that Alan had recognized his true identity. Otherwise, who in their right mind would disguise holy water as wine to serve someone? FOMO's body began to suffer terribly. Blood poured uncontrollably from his mouth, and his pupils went pitch black. At this moment, FOMO needed to remove all of the organs scorched by the holy water. He needed fresh blood and raw meat. Just then, a knock sounded at the door. It was a maid. "My Lord Count, I've come to clean your room." FOMO wore a sinister smile and called the maid inside. The girl stepped in timidly, seeing the floor covered in blood, but by the time she realized something was wrong, it was already too late. "You've come at the perfect time. I need someone like you." When two other maids came looking for him, FOMO had already returned to his elegant demeanor. "That was a delicious dinner. You must be very busy with the banquet." He cheerfully greeted the two maids and didn't forget to explain the disappearance of the maid named Melia. FOMO concocted a clever excuse, saying that because she worked so hard, he had hired her privately for his mansion. Both maids marveled at how lucky Melia was to be a private servant for the Count. But poor Melia was already inside FOMO's stomach. He adjusted his collar and then subconsciously let out a dangerous smile. Now it's time to visit the Grand Prince and pay my respects to him. At the same time, Alan had written down a few names. These were just the scumbags he had spotted on the first floor. There were surely many others. Dian felt a massive headache because they hadn't figured out a way to prove these people were vampires. But at least none of them were originators. So the situation wasn't that dire. Alan didn't understand what originator meant, so Dian began to explain. Alan already knew about the evolution process of the undead. After evolving, if someone is born as a vampire, they are called an originator, like the vampire count they defeated in Lonia last time. Through various situations, these originators create their own works. They are relatively weak compared to the originators, but they have the special ability to hide incredibly well among humans. Can they really hide their identity from the eyes of the Holy Emperor? To Alan's question, Dian was a bit flustered, but what the prince said was true. Those bastards could replace their own bodies with the bodies of the humans they had killed. Alan remembered the heads they had seen on the street. So it seemed that all those victims whose bodies went missing but whose heads were left behind had been taken by vampires. Thinking of this, Alan felt extremely frustrated. He gripped the paper tightly, then threw it at Dian. "Dian Harmon, your status is quite high, right?" "Your Highness, my rank is high enough to mobilize a squad of holy knights under my command." Dian didn't know what Alan was implying, but answered honestly. "Then go and arrest everyone listed here. Assess the situation first, and if necessary, kill them." Dian was stunned, but Alan asserted firmly that he would take full responsibility. I even sent Charlotte to help Dian. Dian was very worried. After all, mobilizing troops during a banquet was no small matter, but there was truly no other way to prove they were vampires. So Alan wanted to kill them first and let the public see them turn into ashes. He also guessed that Count Fomo knew that he had seen through his true face. If they didn't act now, they would put themselves in danger. Dian and Charlotte exchanged looks. They had made their decision. "Then, Your Highness, please take care of yourself." Dian and Charlotte left first. Alan silently calculated a place to hide until something happened, but just then, out of nowhere, a red-headed guy with a cocky look appeared. "Alan, it's been a long time since we last met." His younger brother. This person was Fane, 21 years old, the third grandson of the great Holy Emperor. Relying on the system, Alan could see everything, from his personality to the ambition of this man. It's just that Rafen really has a shallow personality. Seeing his brother Alan, he put on a fake oily grin, but Alan knew he was just a spoiled mama's boy. And even the Holy Emperor, their grandfather, could sense it. Raphael is a prince whose presence is practically non-existent. Raphael flashed a sly smile and started mentioning that besides him, no other princes had come to the banquet today, adding, "Don't be disappointed, they must be busy with something." Busy enough to forget their own brother's celebration? Alan looked at Raphael's pathetic demeanor. It was clear he was trying to provoke him subtly, but Alan played along perfectly by offering his thanks. Thanks to Raphael for taking the time to come. Naturally, that shallow jerk puffed out his chest. Even if Raphael is a coward, he's still someone always craving the throne. Taking this opportunity, he also wanted to warn Alan, though Raphael didn't realize the person in front of him wasn't the same annoying, useless little brother he used to be. "If you're coming to the palace craving the crown, then I might have to become your enemy. Just keep living the life you've been living." Alan shot an annoyed glare at the hand resting on his shoulder. Raffen didn't notice anything unusual about his little brother. After showing off, he waved his hand and left. Alan watched his silhouette with boredom. Even if he weren't here, the throne wouldn't fall to that guy anyway. He's not really kind, nor is he truly evil. He just looks like a third-rate villain. That idiot isn't even worth Alan wasting his breath on. Since he didn't know how strong Count Fomo was, he had to save his energy. Thinking this, Alan continued his plan to find a safe place to hide until the end. After finishing the tasks he'd assigned, he hadn't even run 3 steps when a piercing scream tore through Alan's eardrums. Someone was calling his name again, calling his name with a tone that wasn't exactly friendly. "Alan Alphonse, get out here right now!" Following that shout was another frantic voice. "Prince Luan, please, stop! You shouldn't be moving around this much!" Hearing the name Luan, Alan couldn't take another step. He turned his head and saw his pathetic brother. It's a shame. Luan had the potential to be a perfect prince, but his body had rotted to a terrifying degree. The stench of decay and the suffocating magical power were so strong they made Alan uncomfortable. He knew Luan was still alive, but he was barely clinging to life in a dying body. Yet Luan's willpower was truly incredible because right after that, I used his decaying, mangled hand to firmly grab Alan's collar and hoist him up. "How dare you insult my vassal? The Count is someone who served our mother. I don't think you didn't know that." Guests in the main hall began to be drawn in by Luan's cursing. He repeatedly insulted Alan for dishonoring their mother's name over and over again. I was even shouting so hard that blood splattered onto his precious younger brother's face. If the Holy Emperor hadn't entered the hall right then, Luan might have turned into a monster and devoured Alan. "What are you two doing?" The appearance of the Holy Emperor caused the murmuring hall to suddenly fall silent. Why is no one answering me?" I asked. "What are you two doing?" It was just a question, but the Holy Emperor's voice boomed like a lion's roar. His voice alone carried so much divine power that even a healthy person like Alan felt unsteady. How could a sick man like Luan handle it? He immediately coughed up a mouthful of blood. The Holy Emperor ordered the Archbishop and the other healers to take the first prince away. The Archbishop didn't dare delay for a single second. He rushed to drag Luan away for treatment. Now, only Alan remained, facing his grandfather. The Holy Emperor demanded a satisfactory explanation, because he had heard about him insulting Count Fomo with a broken wine bottle. Alan didn't dare deny the truth, but when the Holy Emperor asked for the reason, he felt like his mouth was sealed. Alan hesitated, unsure if he should reveal that Fomo was a vampire. But he didn't have proof yet, and Grandfather surely wouldn't believe him. "I was too drunk, so I made a mistake," Alan lied. "A mistake, is that so?" the Holy Emperor asked again, but Alan felt the tone and expression weren't quite right, as if he were expecting a different answer. Alan stubbornly repeated his previous answer. Meanwhile, Luan, being treated nearby, pushed the Archbishop away. He grabbed an empty wine glass from the table and threw it straight at Alan. This insolent act infuriated the Holy Emperor. Luan staggered to his feet. "Please forgive my rudeness, but my man was insulted by him. I cannot let this go. I want to duel him." The Holy Emperor thought he had misheard. It was unbelievable that Luan would ask to duel Alan in his current physical state. He promised to punish Alan appropriately after thoroughly investigating the situation, but Luan didn't agree. While bedridden, he had heard about the credit the grandfather had given to Alan for the incident in the Lonia territory. He wanted to duel Alan to expose his true face. Was he truly capable of hunting vampires? Or was he just stealing credit from others? "Aren't you curious, Your Majesty?" The Archbishop was terrified. "Holy Emperor, please stop him! This cannot happen!" However, the Holy Emperor thought for a moment and decided to step aside, leaving the space for Luan and Alan. Luan understood exactly what that gesture meant, so he didn't hold back. Pointing directly at his younger brother, "The Holy Emperor has given us the green light to spar. I am definitely going to teach you a lesson for that insolent attitude of yours. You had better prepare yourself properly." Alan felt incredibly frustrated with these people. They didn't even bother to ask for his opinion. A few people in the room had already left, looking annoyed. They didn't want to get dragged into trouble just because of the seventh prince. It was clear from their behavior that they didn't respect Alan at all. This made a drunken Grill scream out in fury, "You bastards! No matter how pathetic the seventh prince might be, he is still—" Before Rio could finish his sentence, Lord Janet shut him up. He looked awkwardly at Alice, who was standing nearby. "My apologies, Lady Alice. This young man's alcohol tolerance isn't very good." Alice forced a smile. She didn't have time to deal with those two. Earlier, Alan's attitude toward Count Fomo had caught her attention. Why was he staring at the glass of wine the Count was drinking with such an expectant look? Was there something in that glass? And why was Alan acting like that? But the thing that Alice was most concerned about right now was the first prince, Luan. As his personal healer, Alice knew very well that he couldn't push himself too hard. She rushed down, wanting to ensure their duel would end safely. Meanwhile, Alan was extremely miserable, clutching a wooden sword in his hand. He felt completely bewildered. Why did he have to inhabit a body that had such a terrible relationship with his family? Moreover, Alan didn't want to fight a dying man at all. If he dropped dead right in the middle of the fight, that would be a huge problem. Alan glanced toward his grandfather. He didn't know what they were expecting, but it was clear the Holy Emperor had no intention of stopping this fight. As for the Archbishop, he only cared about the first prince's safety. In his eyes, Alan was no different from a bug, and for safety reasons, holy power had been banned in this match, because Luan's current body couldn't withstand the use of holy power anymore. Furthermore, if it were true that the seventh prince was the one who hunted the vampire subject, then he couldn't just rely on holy power to fight him. One could say this was an opportunity to test his martial prowess. The Archbishop's words were clearly aimed at Alan. He was fuming. Back when he fought the vampire count, he obviously only used holy power. Now, they were demanding he prove himself without using holy power. What was that supposed to mean? He didn't even know how to use a sword. And the two people who should have stood up for him, Dean and Charlotte, weren't even here. Alan felt dejected. The situation was stacked against him. Then, there was only one way left. Alan gripped his sword tightly, looking strangely courageous. Luan saw his younger brother's expression change in an instant and let out an "oh," saying, "So you've finally decided to get serious?" He also tightened his grip on his wooden sword, looking ready for the battle. "Your Majesty, please remain neutral in this fight." The Holy Emperor looked at his two grandsons, not forgetting to warn them that, no matter what, they must not forget to respect one another. But Luan paid no heed to that. He looked murderous, as if he wanted to kill Alan right then and there. The Holy Emperor waved his hand, declaring the duel to begin. Alan immediately lunged toward his brother with his sword. Alan also gathered all his strength, wanting to teach him a lesson. But the unexpected happened. Alan lunged, but instead of attacking, he knelt on one knee in front of Luan. He held his sword high with both hands and shouted loudly, "I surrender! I, Alan Alfonso, surrender to Luan Alfonso!" Out of fear, the entire room fell dead silent. Luan was stunned. The Holy Emperor, the Archbishop, and Alice were all stunned. The guests in the hall were even more shocked. It took a few seconds for the Holy Emperor to react, covering his darkened face with his hand. He had calculated every outcome, but he never thought this troublemaker would choose to surrender to avoid the fight. The Holy Emperor couldn't tell if he truly couldn't win or if he was worried about Luan's condition. On the other side, Luan began to react, trembling with rage. "You pathetic bastard!" Luan swung his sword down with all his might onto the floor right next to where Alan was kneeling, startling him. This one swing alone left Luan gasping for air. "Not only do you disrespect my subordinates, but you dare to openly disrespect me just because I look like a corpse? You dare to insult me directly!" Luan gritted out each word, then began swinging wildly, unleashing a stream of uncontrolled, explicit language, which we have censored with a long string of beeps. Alan rolled to this side, then rolled to the other side to dodge each swing from his brother, who had lost it. Brother, mind your dignity!" Luan had completely lost his sanity by now. He no longer cared about dignity and could not forgive what Alan had done. Finally, his anger caused Luan to lose his mind, and he used his holy power. Alan was stunned. He's lost it. Luan's body wouldn't be able to handle it, and even Alan would be blown to bits if he took a hit filled with that much holy power. Alan glanced at his grandfather, but it seemed the supposedly bright and upright Holy Emperor showed no signs of stopping them. Alan had to fend for himself. Alan summoned a shovel. It looked a bit ugly, but it blocked Luan's attack very effectively. The healers nearby gasped, "Where did that shovel come from?" "I don't think he's capable of using spatial magic." "That's not magic. I don't feel any mana. That's holy power." Luan and Alan were clashing intensely. The more Luan fought, the more insane he became. Alan only dared to parry, not counterattack. He didn't understand how his brother could even fight in this body, and if this continued, Luan's life would definitely be in danger. And then, Alan's gaze suddenly fell upon the crowd in the distance. A sinister smile made his skin crawl. That scumbag was Count Fomo. It looked like this was his plan all along. It was him. He was the one who brainwashed Luhan into coming here to lash out. Seeing Fomo now, it looked like he was about to wash his hands of everything after causing such a mess. Alan couldn't let him get away like this. "Brother, I'm so sorry. Please take this and wake up." Alan finally struck back. He focused his holy power and landed a direct blow on Luhan. "Brother, I promise I'll avenge you." The entire hall was horrified. How could a weakling like Luhan withstand such a powerful hit? But Alan didn't have time to worry about his brother right now. He conjured a gun and aimed it straight at Count Fomo. The Archbishop was incredibly frantic, hurriedly urging the Emperor to stop Alan immediately. "Your Majesty, even if it's a gun that can't kill, using it at such close range is still dangerous." Ignoring the voices of those trying to stop him, Alan, raised the barrel, and began to pray. Holy power started to gather. His target was that cunning Count. The bullet of holy power struck FOMO right between the eyes, sending him crashing backward. Alan gritted his teeth in frustration. It wasn't enough. FOMO wasn't dead yet because he had only prayed for a short moment, so the power was still too weak. Alan raised the gun again, wanting to fire another shot. The people in the hall were in absolute chaos by now. They were trampling over each other to escape. Good heavens, the seventh prince has gone mad. The emperor couldn't just watch anymore. He ordered the holy knights to stop the seventh prince. They certainly didn't dare to disobey, and so even though he was a prince, Alan was still tackled and pinned down by 3 or 4 burly knights. "Let me go! I'm doing something important!" Alan struggled with all his might. He just needed one more shot. FOMO would definitely die and turn to ashes, but unfortunately, no one would give Alan that chance. The gun in his hand fell. The assassination of FOMO had failed. A while later, Luhan had finally calmed down and regained his senses, but his head was spinning, continuously thinking about the situation earlier when he fought Alan. The emperor approached the first prince. I was having the same thought as Luhan, that something was definitely going on with Alan. Luhan didn't hide his thoughts from his grandfather. He suddenly remembered the words Dian Haman had said a few days ago, that Alan needed to turn himself into a scumbag, so he would be exiled to the remote, desolate Lonia, secretly building up his strength to avenge his mother. Luhan hadn't believed it, but today, looking at his younger brother's current power, he began to think it might be true. That is why I want to make sure he truly has the qualities of a holy emperor. The words Luhan just uttered left everyone completely stunned, especially the archbishop. Afterward, he coughed up more blood. Luhan himself knew better than anyone that he was truly dying. Originally, he had always wanted to be the next holy emperor, but this body had reached its limit. But Luhan's thirst to avenge his mother had never faded. He wanted all those nobles who laughed at his mother and called her lowly to pay the price. So, Luhan made his decision. Now I must do whatever it takes to make Alan the next holy emperor. Luhan recalled the situation earlier. His younger brother had genuinely wanted to kill Count FOMO. Considering their fight, Luhan hadn't actually been a match for Alan. If Alan were still the same scumbag as before, and had wanted to insult his brother, he would have targeted him directly while fighting. But Alan had ignored Luhan and kept his eyes locked on the Count. Luhan didn't know why his brother was so obsessed with FOMO, but he felt this was far from simple. As he said this, Luhan held his head, groaning in pain. Alice quickly supported him. The archbishop also said that they needed to treat the first prince immediately. The emperor agreed. They temporarily closed the conversation about the earlier banquet to ensure Luhan's survival. "Have you seen Dian Haman anywhere?" Suddenly, the emperor remembered that he hadn't seen that guy all this time. But neither Alice nor the archbishop had seen him. They only knew he had left in the middle of the banquet and hadn't returned since. The emperor pondered for a moment, then shifted his attention to Count FOMO. Knowing the guy had been taken to his room for treatment, the emperor demanded to see him immediately. "Your Majesty, what do you intend to do with the patient?" The archbishop was a bit wary and probed a little. "Isn't he injured because of my grandson? I just want to treat him myself. Should I use a bit of holy power on his head to heal him, I wonder?" The archbishop didn't understand what that question meant, but as a servant, he didn't dare speculate on what the emperor was thinking. Meanwhile, after this palace-shaking commotion, Alan had been thrown into a cell. He was extremely impatient because he had only managed to injure that scumbag FOMO earlier. He couldn't imagine that guy going off to kill servants to restore his strength. Furthermore, the palace was quieter than Alan expected. This made him suspicious of Dian and his plan. Had it failed? When Count FOMO was walking around the banquet hall with such confidence earlier, he must have been hiding something. To vampires, the palace is like the center of the enemy's den. Perhaps they even have a handbook on how to escape danger in emergency situations, doesn't it? Even if that weren't the case, it would be difficult for Dian to attack the nobles because of their status. That is why vampires love to disguise themselves as nobles. A noble status would help them delay arrest if they were suspected. As for Alan, he would certainly have to take responsibility for intending to kill the Count. Thinking this far, Alan, I hate that I can't just gnaw through these bars to break out. Suddenly, slow, leisurely footsteps echo from far away. "Still making a racket even down here, huh?" Haven't even seen the guy but already heard him coming. Must be that rock fan iPhone lover. Alan let out a shout. 3 princes, is it? You should call me brother. The rock fan got annoyed. I saw you fighting earlier. Fighting like that. It wasn't right, Alan. Alan was certain the rock fan wouldn't have come down to this dark, damp dungeon just to preach to him. Maybe he was just gloating because Luan was about to die and Alan had been tossed into jail. Alan didn't want to talk to this guy at all. But suddenly, he remembered. Even if Raphael was an idiot, he was still a prince. That meant he had the authority to get him out of here. Thinking that, Alan immediately switched to a flattering tone. Brother, could you help me get out of here? Why should I do that? What if I get punished for doing it on my own? Isn't the first prince in critical condition right now? Alan cut him off. If I owe something, I want to pay it back quickly. That's why I really want to visit the first prince. You know how I am. Sounds ridiculous, but somehow it was convincing. Especially when he heard Luan was in critical condition, Raphael got even more excited. And he didn't stop there. Alan continued to persuade him. If you let me out, I'll show you a truly interesting spectacle in a bit. Human jealousy is truly terrifying. Alan had only said a few words, pretending he wanted to settle a score with the first prince. Yet the rock fan was so eager to release him, he was even generous enough to lead Alan to the armory. Well, getting out of the dungeon was a win anyway. But Alan didn't know what to do next. There was no one in the palace who could help him, and judging by the time, the vampires had probably already exchanged information with each other. So it was time to use a little authority, wasn't it? Alan sighed. The person he borrowed the power from definitely had to be someone more powerful than him, someone who could use that power freely and was trusted by everyone. Alan immediately thought of his sickly brother. At that thought, he waved his hand and summoned a powerful army, all of them ghosts. Looks like I've got some work for you all. But looking at them, their appearance was too terrifying. Alan quickly made them use armor to cover their faces and bodies. They were in the armory, after all. The armor was cheap, a dime a dozen like dead fish at the market. Alan had originally intended to deal with those vampires as cleanly as possible, but they were too cunning, and Luan didn't understand his intentions either. Reluctantly, Alan had to summon his pets. Looking at the army of ghosts, now neatly dressed in armor like holy knights. True warriors, Alan was extremely hyped. All right, now let's head to the first prince's room. Alan marched aggressively out of the armory. In the hallway, he ran into some soldiers and a few maids. Seeing his massive army, a plan immediately popped into his head. Rebellion, the 7th prince is rebelling. Alan knew people would think that. He ordered his ghost soldiers, "Don't kill anyone! Just clear a path for me!" The soldiers panicked and scrambled to call for reinforcements, knowing Alan was heading for the first prince's room. Both sides began to clash with swords and blades, but the ghosts followed Alan's orders perfectly. They didn't kill anyone, yet they were incredibly effective at hindering those trying to do their jobs. Alan laughed, "Heh heh," and bolted straight to the door of the first prince's room. The soldiers behind him panicked. "Quick, stop him before he gets into the first prince's room." But it was too late. Alan kicked the door open. Inside, several healers were busy treating Luan. They were shocked to see him appear there. But before they could even be surprised for 3 seconds, they were snatched up by Alan's henchmen. The healers were taken outside, and Alan ordered his soldiers to block the door, preventing anyone from entering. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving only the 2 brothers in the room. Luan was too tired to even turn his head. He could only glance at his precious younger brother. "What are you doing?" "I didn't want to do this either. You shouldn't have ruined my plans last time. Now the whole vampire hunt is a disaster." "Are you talking about Count Fomo?" Alan was a bit surprised that Luan had guessed it. Except this time, Luan thought Alan had guessed wrong, because even the palace priests had confirmed that Fomo wasn't a vampire. They were demons in human skin, so they were very hard to distinguish. You can't tell who is human and who is a demon unless you channel holy power into their heads. Luan opened his eyes wide, looking at Alan's expression. He didn't think he was lying. Luan questioned Alan why he hadn't been honest from the start. But Alan knew that even if he spoke up, no one would believe him. He never wanted to get involved with this royal family, or these troublesome vampires, but given the current situation, he had been thoroughly dragged into this vortex. Alan conjured a mask and put it on. Luan struggled to sit up. Immediately after, Alan conjured a shovel. "So the first thing is, please compensate for my efforts with your life." At this moment, the Archbishop had also arrived. He nearly went mad upon learning that the seventh prince had led an army to seize the first prince's room, even though he was just an old man. The archbishop's holy power was still immense. It didn't take much effort for him to knock down a few of Alan's soldiers, but when the helmet shattered, the archbishop was completely horrified. Realizing they were merely corpses, the archbishop shuddered, thinking to himself, could Alan have collected an ancient undead? Furthermore, these things belonged to the darkness, yet they possessed pure holy power just like true holy knights. If he hadn't just shattered their helmets, even the archbishop wouldn't have realized they weren't human, guarding this corridor with a strict no one in, no one out policy. The archbishop ordered his men forward. He was now more desperate to save the Grand Prince than to settle scores with these undead creatures. As the archbishop fought his way to the door, a loud commotion erupted from within, followed by soldiers falling one after another. The archbishop grew even more tense. He kicked the door open and witnessed a truly horrifying sight. Alan was trampling on Luan's frail body, and worse, the shovel in his hand was thrust straight into the man's chest. Blood was gushing everywhere. Terrifying. I'll assume you've repaid my efforts with your life, brother. Now come back to life. In the moment, his body felt the most agonizing pain. Luan began to recall certain events, and he realized there was truly something very strange about FOMO. He only ever reported the bad things Alan had done to him while he was on his sickbed. In those reports, Alan kept insisting that he was of low status, just like his mother, and constantly insulted their mother, when in fact, Luan should have realized sooner that he was trying to provoke him and plant dark thoughts. But the reason Luan never suspected him was that FOMO had been by his side since he was a child. I was also Luan's only emotional support since he lost his mother, which made it impossible for Luan to imagine that this man was a vampire. Now he felt incredibly foolish. And when facing Alan's shovel, he thought it understandable if his brother wanted to kill him. The shovel in Alan's hand drove deep into Luan's chest, but the sensation of pain passed very quickly. Luan felt his body become weightless. His soul slipped out, gently wrapping his arms around his younger brother as a farewell. Alan's abundant holy power flowed ceaselessly into the shovel handle. I am the master of the undead legion and the heir of Geyer, Alan said hoarsely. Luan's soul was suddenly pulled back into his body, and he sat bolt upright, coughing violently. Yet, immediately afterward, Luan's body no longer felt pain, and breathing became much easier. Alan sat nearby, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, but he wore an incredibly satisfied smile. How does it feel to have a new life, brother? Luan observed his own hands. It had been a long time since his skin had looked this healthy. He could also feel that his muscles and bones were doing just fine. He tore the blood-soaked bandages off his body. Could it be that the curse which had tormented him for so long was truly gone? The answer to that was already very clear. Luan couldn't hold back and shouted in joy. It was truly a miracle. Alan was almost exhausted after this resurrection, and he didn't have time to explain much. He could only ask Luan to quickly go find Dian for him. Luan threw on a robe and, brimming with energy, stepped outside. That brat isn't very cute at all, but even so. The misunderstanding between the brothers had been largely resolved, and Luan swore that he would perfectly complete the tasks the little leopard cub was working on. Wandering around the palace for a while, Luan indeed ran into Dian and his subordinates. Dian was arguing with a guard about something, and neither side seemed willing to yield. Sorry, friend, this person only takes my orders. Luan stepped forward, patted Dian on the shoulder, and cut him off. Excuse me, sir, who are you? Dian asked, bewildered, but when he turned and looked closely at the newcomer's face, his eyes instantly widened. Your Highness, the Grand Prince? It goes without saying how shocked Dian was. Luan didn't have time to explain how the curse had been broken. He demanded that Dian give him the list of vampires that Alan had written beforehand, but Dian seemed a bit hesitant. After all, after everything that had happened, his loyalty had leaned toward Alan more. What if you and Luan are at odds? Don't worry, Alan personally asked me to help. The miracle that happened to my body is proof enough. Dian pondered for a moment. He ultimately chose to give Luan the list. The Grand Prince hadn't imagined that the number of vampires infiltrated among them was so high. Among them were even nobles from neighboring countries. It was just a pity that Dian didn't have enough authority, so he could only keep them in check. Luan patted Dian on the shoulder, praising him for doing a great job. If it weren't for Dian holding those bastards back, capturing them would have been much harder. It's been a long time since I used my power. Luan took a deep breath, greedily enjoying his new life after being reborn. Very quickly, several scythes appeared behind his back. But they weren't the scythes of the Grim Reaper, because Luan was as strong as an ox now. They had arrived at the order of Grand Prince Luan Alphonse. It was the Heretic Investigation Division and the Red Cross Unit, which hadn't been summoned in a very long time. This was a specialized army trained for purging. Only the Grand Prince had the authority to summon them, and naturally, this team only followed his orders. Although their numbers were few, they were one of the 5 strongest armies of the Holy Empire. Thank you all for gathering here. Following this is a small announcement. It's been a long time since you last went on a hunt, hasn't it? Luan held up the list and declared that the names on it were all those who had stained the Holy Empire. They even murdered my mother. Luan ordered his army. When you catch them, rip their chests open and take their hearts out to examine them. And you must also shatter their skulls to see if there is any trace of magic inside. Make them experience terrifying and endless pain so they realize how meaningless their fake lives really are. This was a vampire hunt in the truest sense. Dian was a bit dazed. The Grand Prince had just recovered, yet he was so brutal. Under Luan's command, the Heretic Investigation Division moved quickly. Their scythes swept across the party, and in no time they had taken the head of a nobleman. As expected, there was a small residue of magic beneath his skin. So, the fact that those on the list were vampires was accurate. The captain of the investigation team immediately ordered them to kill everyone. The welcome banquet for Alan that night turned into a bloodbath, filled with the sounds of slaughter and screaming. Luan calmly observed the whole situation, while Dian felt his hair standing on end. This was his first time seeing the Heretic Investigation Squad and the Red Cross working. They didn't care about anything except capturing and killing those on their list. They were truly on a hunt, but the most damnable mastermind, FOMO, was nowhere to be found, which made Dian very anxious. Luhan, on the other hand, seemed quite relaxed, because he knew FOMO had been taken to a place far more terrifying than this. Why aren't you answering me, Count FOMO? The place Luhan mentioned was right in front of the throne. Right now, FOMO was facing that brilliant king and his sharp question, "Are you a vampire?" Before the Holy Emperor, FOMO felt like nothing more than an insect. It was just that one lethal question. I truly didn't know how to answer. FOMO swallowed hard out of fear. He felt incredibly regretful now. When he heard the Holy Emperor would personally treat him, he should have refused. What's wrong? Did I hit a nerve? The Holy Emperor, seeing FOMO stammering and unable to answer, stood up. Forgive me for my improper attitude, but if you are truly human, then I will apologize later. Seeing the Holy Emperor closing in, FOMO became even more tense. He clung to the excuse that the priests had already verified he was human. But now the Holy Emperor didn't even trust the competence of those priests anymore. He grew even more panicked as he could hear deadly sounds echoing in every corner of the palace. He could even sense his own kind being hunted down even after escaping the palace. Since throwing Alan in prison, FOMO had been confident that he had everything under control. But with the current situation, the terror in his heart grew by the second. How could vampires, from being the hunters, turn into the prey like this? FOMO wanted to get out of there quickly, but the Holy Emperor didn't seem like he was going to let him off that easily. Seeing FOMO glancing around nervously, the Holy Emperor grew impatient. Look at me, Count FOMO. You're clearly younger than me, so why is your hearing worse than mine? FOMO looked around. He confirmed there were no weapons, no holy knights, and no soldiers here. FOMO knew the person in front of him was the hero who had once killed the Soul King, but now he was old too. And FOMO was one who could possess eternal life. He secretly calculated the difference in strength between himself and his opponent. FOMO thought he could defeat the Holy Emperor. Suddenly he burst into cackling laughter. Why are you laughing? Do you find what I said amusing? Damn, Holy Emperor, you're just a fucking old man. The Holy Emperor was slightly surprised when the man suddenly spoke so rudely. He could vaguely predict what was about to happen. Sure enough, right after that, FOMO frankly admitted he was a vampire, then immediately bit off his own right arm. Fresh blood gushed out like a spring, and FOMO's expression became increasingly terrifying. His arm grew long rapidly, his eyes turned blood red, and the arm he had just bitten off instantly grew back. Why do I need to be polite to a fucking old man like you? I am the predator. I will hunt and devour people like you. That bizarre giant arm writhed in the air like a snake, eventually grabbing the Holy Emperor. FOMO was extremely smug. The Holy Emperor was a living historical relic of humanity. If he could eat him alive, he would surely be recognized by other master vampires. Seeing the king locked in his palm, FOMO laughed like a madman. "Now you're helpless, aren't you, old man?" Then, he increased the pressure, wanting to crush the Holy Emperor to death on the spot, but the most unexpected thing happened right after. The Holy Emperor, unarmed, managed to pry his fingers apart. His eyes were cold, looking no different from the god of death as he stepped out from the giant palm. FOMO knew he was done for. Sure enough, right after that, the Holy Emperor lunged at him and delivered a heaven-shattering punch to this bastard. He found it incredibly ridiculous. This bastard wasn't even a master vampire. Yet he had no idea where he got all that confidence to think he could defeat him. "Even the Soul King Aemon I killed and tore his skull out, so you think trash? Like you is anything to me?" Count FOMO was sent flying out of his mind by that punch from the Holy Emperor. He probably wasn't dead yet, but he was in miserable shape. It served him right. Who told him to mess with a hero? The legendary Holy Emperor himself. The king rolled up his sleeves, decisively grabbed FOMO's head, and pulled. The force and motion were decisive, causing his head to immediately separate from his neck. The skull continued to groan. It even drew the Holy Emperor's attention. It seems this guy is much stronger than his peers, being beaten up and even having his head ripped off and still being alive. "All right, don't die yet, because I need to know the truth behind Julicia's case," the Holy Emperor whispered continuously to the skull. He swore he would make FOMO wish he were dead. Meanwhile, Raphael was also having trouble with his own mother, Mrs. Rose Darina. His mother seemed like a short-tempered person. The proof was that after she found out her precious son had released Alan, Raphael took a vase right to the forehead. "I told you to stay put. I told you not to do anything that would make the Holy Emperor hate you." This domestic violence didn't even stop at that vase. Rose lunged at her son, grabbing him by the collar and shaking him violently, all the while screaming that Joffrey was a useless bastard who had ruined everything she had worked so hard to build. After beating Joffrey savagely, the woman, as if suffering from split personalities, suddenly broke down in tears, saying, "I'm sorry, my son, I love you so much, Jack Fan." "Oh, are you hurt anywhere?" That was truly the most useless question of all time, considering that a stream of chili sauce was already running down Jack Fan's forehead. It seemed Rose was obsessed with her son becoming the next Holy Emperor. She claimed it was the only way the Crown Prince would look at her instead of Princess Julicia. "My beloved son, you understand how I feel, don't you?" Raphael, who was in a great deal of pain, just sighed and gave the response his mother wanted to hear out of habit. "Of course, mother. I will definitely become the next Holy Emperor." 3 weeks later, at the Imperial Court, everything had been settled smoothly. On the night Alan and Luan launched the hunt, more than half of those on the list were killed, and the remaining vampires were executed and had their heads displayed in the square. The people of the Holy Empire could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Any vampire still in hiding would now have to tread carefully. Furthermore, a number of vampires were secretly taken away to be used as test subjects, thanks to their ability to regenerate infinitely. What happened in the capital of the Holy Empire spread across the entire continent. Most importantly, the appearance of someone with the ability to detect vampires shook the whole nation, and all eyes were now fixed on the 7th prince, Alan. And because of that, he unintentionally became the target of an interrogation by the Archbishop. Alan had just opened his eyes and didn't even know what was happening. Why had he gone from being a hero to being interrogated by both the Inquisition and the Archbishop? "7th Prince, you led troops to cause chaos in the palace. That is a violation of the laws of the Holy Empire." Alan looked at the Archbishop with exhaustion. He couldn't believe this old man could actually make up such a pathetic excuse. Right now, he felt like throwing the old man into a cell with the vampires.